Welcome to my channel Midnight Stories, where you find horror stories that scare you. Before watching, please press like to support me in producing more stories. This helps in spreading the video and reaching more people. Thank you for your support and enjoy watching. Hey everyone, if you enjoy my content, don't forget to check out my second channel. The link is in the description or the comments. Your support means the world to me. My name is James. I'm now 28 years old and living in Texas now. Anyways, here's my story. So back in 2019, I remember there being a big uproar of unknown creatures roaming the forest, like Bigfoot and skinwalkers. But this story isn't about them. This story is about probably one of the scariest things I think I've ever heard about, the Wendigo. A few months after one of my friends, Jacob, mentioned this big uproar, I went to go see him since I had been away enlisted in the United States Marines. I got back after being discharged, and one of the first things I did was go and see him. We're having a good old time, and he brought up the idea of going out to a little hangout spot his now ex-girlfriend took him to when they wanted to get away for a few hours. So I decided why not, so I grabbed my gun and we went out to this extremely secluded area and started messing around on the old dock that was there. It had been pretty much forgotten by the looks of it, poorly maintained, and some boards were almost completely rotted through. So about 30 minutes into our shenanigans, Jacob brought up the topic of the Wendigo. The name sounded a little scary even for me. Curious, I asked him about it. He said that if you went into the woods and said Wendigo 3 times, you would come across the scariest looking thing you've ever seen. Me calling his bluff, I told him to prove it. To this day, I wished I hadn't. We start walking on this little path that lead deep into the thick woods close to the Alabama state line. We walked for maybe 20-ish minutes and decided we were in a good spot. I feel it's worth knowing that it had been raining a lot over the past couple days, so the ground was completely saturated with water. I turned to Jacob and he dares me to do it. I stood there in complete silence. The rest of the forest was almost silent as well, besides the tall pines swaying in the wind high above our heads. Reluctantly, I slowly started to say it. Wendigo, Wendigo, Wendigo. Then, nothing happened. I let out a silent sigh of relief at the fact that nothing happened. One thing about mine and Jacob's friendship is we loved it when one of us proved the other wrong about something. In our friendship of 10 years, I think it was one of the first times I had proven him wrong at anything. We started to talk a little bit of shit back and forth at each other when we heard a noise in the distance. Me still having the reflexes I had from the Marines, I immediately snapped towards the direction of the noise that were just then turning into asterisk noises. Asterisk. I started to move closer to then noises, and then shortly after we saw a few coyotes running across the path about 30 feet in front of us. I breathed another sigh of relief, but that relief didn't last long since I knew something was up. I didn't know what was up at first, but I just knew it was time for me and Jacob to leave. As we turned to leave the woods, all of a sudden, a tall pine tree started to groan and creak as it started to come down. Noticing this, and in a moment of pure instinct, I shoved Jacob forward as the tree came falling through the rest of the branches and landed right in between us. Jacob let out a cry of terror as the tree landed, and I hopped the tree to get to him. I could feel his heart pounding like a drum as I grabbed him by his shirt and yanked him to his feet. He was still terrified and still practically crying as I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Move, Jacob, fucking move now!" I spun him around really hard, causing him to fall to his knees. I quickly got him up and we both started to sprint down the path back in the direction we came. I didn't dare look back, and neither did Jacob. I was sprinting through the woods when a familiar sound came from behind me. "Jacob, Jacob, come quick!" It was the sound of Jacob's younger sister, Olivia. He turned and tried to get past me the whole time he was screaming, "Olivia!" I stopped him and said, "Jacob, look at me, it's not her. Do you hear me? It's not her." Just then, another pine tree started to buckle. I saw it just in time to tackle Jacob down to the ground as both of us were nearly crushed. I screamed at Jacob once more, "Go! Get out of here! Go now!" As I was screaming that, I pulled my gun out of my waistband and aimed it down the trail in the direction from whence we came. Jacob made it to the opening of the trail and turned back and noticed I was still aiming my gun down the trail. "Bradley, get out of there! Simon, hurry!" I turned and started sprinting towards him. As I made it into the clearing a good 50 feet, I turned and me and Jacob both saw it. The thing we had ushered into showing itself, the Wendigo. It stood about 9 feet tall on its hind legs. There was practically no meat on its bones. It had really skinny legs and even skinnier arms. Its skin a pale white, almost like a vampire's. But the thing I noticed the most about it were the eyes. A vibrant blue, almost like lightsaber blue for those who have seen Star Wars. Having had enough fear, I raised my gun and fired at the Wendigo. Jacob, not sticking around to see if I had killed it, turned and ran towards the car. I turned and did the same thing as he passed me. That was my first experience with this so-called Wendigo, and I pray almost every night I never have to encounter something that terrifying again. The Not Deer at Fort Flagler, from Madam Madman. It all started when my cousins had come to visit from Nevada up to Washington for a wedding. It had been 3 days after the wedding, and we had gone to a beach near the coast to hang out. We spent a couple of hours paddleboarding, catching fish, talking with relatives, and eating watermelon on the warm beach sand. Once the sun has started to set, this is in Washington, so the sun stays out until 9, we had packed up all our things and had wanted to show our cousins the abandoned military fort, as it was a very interesting place. The fort was in C shape with rooms along the side of it, with a large dark hallway connecting each sides of the C. The base was built in a hill, and you could walk up on the top of the base and look down over the edge. Me and my cousins were still on the ground, with our aunt, which I'll call Kay. "Hey kids, we can go and walk on top of the base, can we go?" she asked. We all were ecstatic at the idea of going on top of the base, except for me, who had been here multiple times, and we went up. Now, the base had a smooth, grassy top that tapered into woods on the rest of the hill. My aunt and cousins had unknowingly gone back down to the ground, and I was there alone. I had stupidly decided to not go back the way I came, like my relatives, but to go all the way around the flat surface of the base. I was around halfway to the other end when I felt uneasy. I had heard that when you truly know that if you are in danger, your heartbeat will feel faster. I felt my chest, and my heart was pounding. I then realized that the usual barn swallows that live in the base had stopped chirping and were gone. I looked around, and in the wood line was a deer just staring at me. I sighed a sigh of relief, but the feeling did not go away, and as I looked closer, I noticed that the deer had these terrible forward-facing eyes. I froze. I was an animal and cryptid fanatic, and knew plenty about dangerous animals for a 13-year-old. And I knew that this deer's eyes were not natural and were predatory. I didn't know what to do to escape a dangerous deer, and for some reason my mind shot at some show where the characters had to watch a magpie to stop it from attacking them when they weren't looking. So I set my eyes on the deer and never took them off of it. As I walked backwards, the deer's neck had turned completely unnaturally in a circle, the same ungodly eyes beaming back at me. I started to panic. "Okay, when you get to the hill slope, you're going to run as fast as you can. You can do this," I thought. The deer was still looking at me in the same unnaturally bent position. I couldn't take the panic and dread, so I ran. I was thankful I had done track at school the year before, because I had ran from the base to the parking lot in mere seconds. "Pepe, what's wrong?" asked Kay and my mom. I told them everything, and that we had to leave. Once we were home, I told my other aunts and my mom and dad. One of my aunts, who I'll call B, chimed in and asked if it was a fleshgate or a crawler, but I said it was a really messed up deer with weird eyes and an extremely flexible neck. Another aunt, I'll call C, said it may have been a knot deer. I'm still not sure if it was a knot deer or a skinwalker, but I'm glad it didn't chase me or attack me while I ran down the hill. The weathered wooden sign creaked in the breeze as I pulled up to the secluded cabin. Pinehaven was etched into the wood, though the faded letters barely stood out against the weathered grain. I stepped out of my car, stretching after the long drive from Portland. The crisp mountain air filled my lungs, a welcome change from the city's smog. My name is Malachi Atkinson, and at 32 years old, I was in desperate need of this break. 12 years into my career as an IT security specialist, the constant barrage of cyber threats and late-night emergencies had taken their toll. When my boss suggested I use some of my accrued vacation time, I jumped at the chance. The cabin was modest but charming, a single-story structure with a wide porch and large windows overlooking the densely wooded property. Inside, the decor was rustic, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall of the living room. A mounted deer head gazed impassively from above the mantel, its glass eyes seeming to follow me as I explored. I unpacked quickly, eager to settle in and begin my digital detox. No laptop, no smartphone, just me, a stack of books, and the great outdoors. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and purple, I stepped out onto the porch with a steaming mug of coffee. The forest stretched out before me, an endless sea of green. In the distance, I could make out the snow-capped peaks of the Cascade Range. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or call of a bird. For the first time in years, I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. Growing up on a small farm in eastern Oregon, I'd always felt a connection to nature. But as my career took off, those roots had been slowly forgotten. Now, standing on this porch watching the last rays of sunlight filter through the trees, I felt that connection rekindling. As darkness fell, I retreated inside, looking forward to a quiet evening by the fire. I had no idea that this peaceful retreat was about to become a waking nightmare. The next morning dawned bright and clear. After a hearty breakfast of bacon and eggs, I laced up my hiking boots, ready to explore the surrounding wilderness. The trail map provided by the cabin's owner showed several routes of varying difficulty. I opted for a moderate 5-mile loop that promised scenic views of a nearby lake. The hike started pleasantly enough. The trail was well maintained, winding through stands of towering Douglas firs and fragrant cedar. Shafts of sunlight pierced the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. Birds flitted from branch to branch, their songs a cheerful counterpoint to the crunch of pine needles beneath my feet. About 2 miles in, I paused to catch my breath and take a swig from my water bottle. That's when I noticed something odd. The forest had grown eerily quiet. No bird song, no rustling leaves, not even the buzz of insects. It was as if the entire woodland had collectively held its breath. A chill ran down my spine, despite the warm spring day. I shook off the feeling, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. Still, I picked up my pace, suddenly eager to complete the loop and return to the safety of the cabin. As I rounded a bend in the trail, a flash of color caught my eye. Something red was snagged on a low-hanging branch just off the path. Drawing closer, my blood ran cold. It was a scrap of fabric, a torn piece of flannel shirt stained dark with what could only be dried blood. My heart pounding, I scanned the surrounding area. The underbrush showed signs of disturbance, as if something or someone had crashed through in a hurry. Against my better judgment, I pushed through the foliage, following the trail of broken branches and disturbed earth. The narrow game trail led to a small clearing beside a burbling stream. What I saw there would haunt me for years to come. Strewn along the water's edge were more scraps of bloody clothing, a mangled backpack, and worst of all, unmistakable claw marks gouged deep into the trunk of a nearby tree. Panic rising in my throat, I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over an exposed root. Whatever had done this was clearly dangerous, and potentially still in the area. All thoughts of completing the hike vanished as I turned and ran, retracing my steps as quickly as I could without risking a fall. By the time I burst out of the tree line and into the cabin's yard, I was gasping for breath, my t-shirt soaked with sweat. I fumbled with the key, hands shaking as I locked the door behind me. Grabbing my cell phone, I cursed as I saw the "no service" message mockingly displayed on the screen. As the adrenaline began to fade, doubt crept in. Had I overreacted? Maybe there was a perfectly logical explanation for what I'd seen. A hunter field dressing their kill, perhaps, or the aftermath of an animal attack on local wildlife. But deep down, I knew I was grasping at straws. Something was very wrong in these woods, and I was alone, cut off from help. Little did I know my ordeal was only beginning. As twilight deepened into true night, I paced the cabin's living room, debating my next move. The rational part of my brain argued for caution. It was dangerous to travel unfamiliar mountain roads after dark. Better to wait until morning, then make the 2-hour drive back to civilization, where I could alert the authorities. But another part of me, driven by a primal fear I'd never experienced before, screamed to flee immediately. Every creak of the cabin's timber frame, every rustle of wind through the trees outside, set my nerves on edge. I compromised by loading my belongings into the car, ready for a quick getaway if needed. As I made one last trip to retrieve my jacket, a glint of metal caught my eye. Pushing aside a stack of firewood revealed a shotgun, likely left behind by a previous tenant. I hesitated only a moment before grabbing it, checking that it was loaded. The solid weight in my hands provided a small measure of comfort. Back inside, I drew the curtains and built up the fire, more for the illusion of safety than warmth. Sleep was out of the question. Instead, I kept vigil, shotgun across my lap as I stared into the flames, straining to hear any sound of approach above the crackling wood. Hours passed in tense silence. My eyelids grew heavy, the warmth of the fire lulling me despite my best efforts. I jerked awake some time later, unsure how long I'd dozed. The fire had burned low, casting flickering shadows across the room. For a moment, I couldn't identify what had woken me. Then I heard it, a soft scraping sound coming from the porch. My grip tightened on the shotgun as I rose slowly to my feet, every muscle tense. The scraping came again, followed by a low guttural sound that raised the hair on the back of my neck. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Not quite animal, but far from human. My heart pounding so loudly I was sure it must be audible. I crept towards the window. With trembling fingers, I parted the curtain just enough to peer out. What I saw in that moment defied explanation. A shape moved in the darkness, huge, easily 7 feet tall, but hunched and twisted in a way that seemed fundamentally wrong. Its limbs were too long, joints bent at impossible angles. As it turned, I caught a glimpse of its face in the dim moonlight. Red eyes gleamed with predatory intelligence, set deep in a distorted, almost skeletal visage. Patches of coarse fur covered its body, interspersed with stretches of pallid, sickly-looking skin. I recoiled from the window, bile rising in my throat. This was no bear, no mountain lion, nothing that should exist in the natural world. As if sensing my gaze, the creature's head snapped towards the cabin. A sickening grin spread across its elongated muzzle, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. With a bone-chilling howl, it lunged for the door. I stumbled back, raising the shotgun with shaking hands. The wooden door frame splintered under the impact. I fired blindly, the deafening report filling the small cabin. Whether by luck or some latent skill, the blast caught the creature full in the chest. It reeled backward with an agonized shriek, giving me just enough time to bolt for the car. I fumbled with the keys, the engine roaring to life as I slammed it into gear. Gravel sprayed as I accelerated down the narrow drive, the creature's howls of rage fading behind me. But as the trees whipped past in the headlights' glare, I knew with sickening certainty that this nightmare was far from over. The mountain road twisted treacherously before me, each curve a test of nerve and skill. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, foot heavy on the accelerator despite the danger. The need for speed warred with the very real possibility of plunging off the sheer drop that yawned just beyond the guardrail. My mind raced even faster than the car, trying to process what I'd seen. How could such a creature exist? Was I going mad? But the lingering smell of cordite from the shotgun blast and the very real terror coursing through my veins were undeniable proof of the encounter's reality. A flash of movement in my rearview mirror sent a jolt of panic through me. Nothing but shadows and trees, I told myself, even as I pressed the gas pedal further. The engine whined in protest as I took the next curve too fast, tires squealing. I was so focused on the road ahead and the imagined pursuit behind that I almost missed the scene of carnage that suddenly appeared in my headlights. A jackknifed semi blocked most of the highway, its trailer lying on its side like a beached whale. As I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop mere feet from the wreckage, my blood ran cold. The truck's cab was a mangled ruin, as if something immensely strong had peeled it open like a tin can. And there, sprawled half in and half out of the shattered windshield, was the driver, or what was left of him. His torso was a shredded mass of flesh and bone, claw marks raking across what remained of his chest. One arm was missing entirely, ragged tendons and splintered bone testament to the violence of its removal. I retched, barely managing to open the car door before emptying the contents of my stomach onto the asphalt. When the heaves finally subsided, I looked up, suddenly aware of how exposed I was. The surrounding forest pressed close to the road, inky blackness between the trees concealing who knew what horrors. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone, praying for a signal this close to the highway. Nothing, not even a single bar. Desperation clawed at me as I realized I was utterly alone, with no way to call for help or warn others of the danger. I had a choice to make. I could try to find a way around the wreck, pushing onwards towards the distant promise of civilization and safety. Or I could attempt to backtrack, hoping to find another route down the mountain. Both options carried the risk of encountering the creature again, or worse, discovering I wasn't dealing with just one of these monstrosities. As I stood there, paralyzed by indecision, a sound drifted on the night air, a long, mournful howl filled with equal parts hunger and triumph. It was answered by another, then another, a chorus of inhuman voices that spoke of ancient, primal evil. I dove back into my car, slamming the door and fumbling to engage the locks. My breath came in ragged gasps as I tried to think through the haze of terror. I had to warn someone, anyone, about what was happening here. Even if I didn't make it out alive, there needed to be a record. With trembling fingers, I pulled a notepad and pen from the glove compartment. As quickly as I could, I began to write. Everything from my background to the details of my grisly discoveries in the woods. I described the creature in as much detail as I could bear to recall, and the growing realization that there were more of them out there. I had just finished scrawling my signature at the bottom of the page when an ear-splitting screech of tearing metal filled the air. The car rocked violently as something massive slammed into the passenger side. Slowly, hard in my throat, I turned to look out the window. There, illuminated in the harsh glare of the headlights, was the twisted face of my pursuer. Its red eyes bored into mine, filled with malevolent hunger. As its misshapen maw split in a horrific grin, I knew with nauseating certainty that my chances of survival had just plummeted to nearly zero. Time seemed to slow as I stared into the creature's hellish eyes. Its claws scrabbled against the car's frame, the sound of rending metal filling the air. In that moment of paralyzed terror, a strange calm washed over me. If this was to be my end, I would not go quietly into the night. With a surge of adrenaline, I slammed the car into reverse. The sudden movement caught the creature off guard, and it lost its grip as I accelerated backwards. Its howl of frustration was cut short as I shifted gears and floored the accelerator, the front bumper catching it squarely in the chest. The impact was bone-jarring. My head snapped forward, then back against the headrest. Through the spiderweb of cracks spreading across my windshield, I saw the creature tumble over the hood and out of sight. I didn't slow down to see if it was truly injured. Instead, I wrenched the steering wheel hard, the tires squealing in protest as I maneuvered around the jackknifed semi. The next few minutes were a blur of hairpin turns and barely avoided collisions. I drove with reckless abandon, knowing that to slow down meant certain death. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel, every muscle tense as I pushed the car to its limits. As I rounded a particularly sharp bend, my headlights illuminated a welcome sight. A gas station, its fluorescent lights a beacon of hope in the darkness. Without hesitation, I pulled into the parking lot, tires screeching as I brought the car to an abrupt halt. I burst through the door, startling the older woman behind the counter. "Please," I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. "I need help. You need to call the police, the army, anyone." The woman, her name tag read, Beatrice, regarded me with a mixture of concern and wariness. "Slow down, young man. What's got you in such a state?" I ran a trembling hand through my sweat-soaked hair, trying to find words that wouldn't make me sound completely unhinged. "There's something out there, in the woods. It's killing people. I saw... God, the things I saw." My voice broke, the full weight of the night's horrors crashing down on me. Beatrice's expression softened. She came around the counter, gently guiding me to a chair. "You just sit tight. I'll call the sheriff's office. They'll sort this out." As she turned towards the phone, a resounding crash shook the building. The The plate glass window at the front of the store exploded inward in a shower of glittering shards. Beatrice's scream was cut short as a massive fur-covered arm shot through the opening, claws gleaming in the harsh fluorescent light. I reacted on pure instinct, diving behind a rack of snack foods. Beatrice wasn't so lucky. The creature's claws closed around her ankle, dragging her towards the shattered window. Her fingers scrabbled uselessly against the linoleum as she disappeared into the night, her terrified shrieks abruptly silenced. Nausea and guilt warred in my stomach. Another innocent life lost because of me, because I had led this monstrosity here. But there was no time for self-recrimination. I could hear the creature moving outside, its heavy breathing and the scrape of claws on pavement sending shivers down my spine. My eyes darted around the store, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. They landed on a rack near the register, filled with road flares. A desperate plan began to form in my mind. I army-crawled towards the counter, wincing as broken glass cut into my palms. Just as I reached for the flares, a shadow fell across me. I looked up to see the creature framed in the destroyed window, its eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. Time slowed to a crawl. I could see every detail of its nightmarish visage, the elongated snout filled with dagger-like teeth, the patches of mangy fur interspersed with sickly pale skin, the twisted horns protruding from its misshapen skull. Its mouth opened in a feral grin, strings of saliva dripping from yellowed fangs. With a wordless cry of desperation, I lunged for the flares. My fingers closed around one just as the creature pounced. I rolled to the side, feeling the wind of its passage as massive claws gouged furrows in the floor where I had been a split second before. Scrambling to my feet, I struck the flare against the counter. It ignited with a hiss, bathing the store in harsh red light. The creature recoiled, momentarily blinded by the sudden glare. I seized the opportunity, hurling the burning flare directly at its face. The monster's howl of pain was deafening in the confined space. It thrashed wildly, claws raking the air as it tried to dislodge the sputtering flare now lodged in the matted fur of its shoulder. The acrid stench of burning hair filled the air. I didn't wait to see if the injury was serious. Grabbing a handful more flares, I bolted for the door leading to the back of the store. Behind me, I could hear the creature's enraged roars, punctuated by the sound of shattering glass and tearing metal as it demolished the store in its frenzy. The back room was cluttered with boxes and cleaning supplies. My eyes darted frantically, searching for an exit. There, a fire door, red emergency bar gleaming dully in the dim light. I shouldered it open, stumbling out into the cool night air. I found myself in a small parking area behind the store, surrounded on three sides by dense forest. My car was on the other side of the building, unreachable with the creature between us. I had only moments before it recovered and came after me again. A rusted pickup truck sat in the far corner of the lot, looking like it hadn't moved in years. It was a long shot, but it was my only chance. I sprinted towards it, fumbling with the door handle. By some miracle, it was unlocked. The interior smelled of stale cigarettes and mildew. I bent down, fingers searching desperately beneath the steering column. There, a bundle of wires. I silently thanked a misspent youth and a friend who'd had a penchant for borrowing cars as I stripped the wires with shaking hands. Just as I touched the exposed copper together, producing a shower of sparks, an earth-shaking roar split the night. The creature burst through the back wall of the store in an explosion of splintered wood and twisted metal. Its red eyes locked onto me, blazing with inhuman hatred. The engine coughed once, twice, and then roared to life. I slammed the truck into gear just as the monster charged. Its claws raked across the tailgate as I floored the accelerator, tires spinning on loose gravel before finding purchase. I fishtailed onto the main road, the speedometer climbing rapidly. In the rearview mirror, I could see the creature giving chase, moving with terrifying speed on all fours. But slowly, gradually, it began to fall behind. As the distance between us grew, a hysterical laugh bubbled up from my chest. I had survived. Somehow, against all odds, I had escaped that nightmare. But my elation was short-lived. As my pulse began to slow and the adrenaline ebbed, the full weight of what I'd experienced settled over me like a shroud. The horrors I'd witnessed, the lives lost, they would haunt me forever. And worse, I knew with sickening certainty that this was far from over. Those creatures were still out there, and someone had to stop them. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, I pressed down harder on the accelerator. I had to find help, had to convince someone to believe my incredible story. The fate of countless innocent lives might depend on it. The lonely highway stretched out before me, leading towards an uncertain future. But one thing was clear, my life would never be the same again. The sun was well above the horizon by the time I reached the outskirts of a small town. My stolen truck, running on fumes, sputtered to a halt outside a weathered police station. I stumbled out, legs weak and shaking from the night's ordeal. The desk sergeant looked up as I burst through the door, his expression quickly shifting from boredom to concern. "Sir, are you all right?" I must have been quite a sight, clothes torn and bloodied, eyes wild with exhaustion and lingering terror. The words tumbled out of me in a rush, a disjointed account of monsters in the woods, mangled bodies, and narrow escapes. As I spoke, the sergeant's face grew increasingly skeptical. When I finally ran out of breath, he said gently, "Son, why don't you sit down? I'll get you some coffee and we'll sort this out." What followed was hours of frustration. More officers arrived, taking my statement, asking the same questions over and over. I could see the disbelief in their eyes, the sidelong glances they exchanged. They were humoring me, waiting for the punchline to what they clearly thought was an elaborate hoax or the ramblings of a madman. "Look," I said for what felt like the 100th time, "I know how it sounds, but I'm telling you, there's something out there. People are dead. That gas station." "We've sent a car out to check the location you described," one of the detectives interrupted. "They'll radio in if they find anything unusual." As if on cue, the radio crackled to life. I leaned forward, heart pounding, certain that now, finally, they would have to believe me. But the hope died as I listened to the report. "Dispatch, this is Unit 14. We're at the gas station. Place looks like it's been closed for months. No signs of any disturbance or, monster attack." The detective raised an eyebrow at me. I shook my head in disbelief. "That's impossible. I was there just hours ago. The woman who worked there, Beatrice." "Son," the detective said, not unkindly, "there hasn't been anyone named Beatrice working at that station for years. It went out of business back in 2019. I slumped in my chair, mind reeling. How could this be? I knew what I had seen, what I had experienced, the terror, the pain, the loss. It had all been real, hadn't it? As the day wore on, my certainty began to waver. Maybe the stress of my job, the isolation of the cabin, had caused some kind of breakdown. But even as I began to doubt my own memories, a part of me remained convinced. The danger was real, whether anyone believed me or not. Eventually, they released me with a warning about filing false reports and a recommendation to seek counseling. I stood on the steps of the police station, feeling utterly lost and alone. My phone, silent for so long in the remote wilderness, suddenly chimed with a barrage of missed calls and messages. Colleagues wondering where I was, why I hadn't returned from vacation as scheduled. My boss, initially concerned, now angry at my unexplained absence. I scrolled through them numbly, the mundane worries of my old life seeming trivial in the face of what I'd experienced. How could I go back to worrying about firewalls and data breaches when I knew what lurked in the shadows of the world? As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, a chill ran down my spine. Somewhere out there, the creatures were stirring, preparing to hunt under cover of darkness, and no one believed they existed. In that moment, I made a decision. If the authorities wouldn't act, then it was up to me. I would find proof, irrefutable evidence of the monster's existence. And then, maybe, I could prevent anyone else from suffering the fate of those I'd seen torn apart in the woods. With renewed purpose, I set off down the street. The journey ahead would be long and dangerous, but I was no longer the same man who had driven up to that cabin seeking a peaceful retreat. I was a survivor, and I would not rest until the truth was known. As night fell, I cast one last look at the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, I could have sworn I heard the faint echo of an inhuman howl. The hunt was on, but this time I would be the hunter. Weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and fruitless investigations. I threw myself into researching similar incidents, scouring newspaper archives and internet forums for any hint that others had encountered the creatures. My apartment walls became a chaotic tapestry of maps, photographs, and scribbled notes connected by a web of red string. I lost my job, of course. Missed deadlines and increasingly erratic behavior saw to that. But I barely noticed. So consumed was I by my quest for answers. Every waking moment was devoted to piecing together the puzzle, driven by the constant fear that with each passing day, more innocent lives were being lost to the monsters lurking in the shadows. My few remaining friends drifted away, concerned by my obsession, but unable to penetrate the wall of secrecy I'd built around myself. I couldn't risk sharing what I knew, not when the stakes were so high. The isolation gnawed at me, but I pushed through, sustained by the conviction that I was the only one who could expose the truth. It was during one of my late-night deep dives into obscure corners of the internet that I stumbled upon a promising lead. A grainy video, shaky and indistinct, but unmistakably showing a creature similar to what I'd encountered. The uploader, using the handle Shadowhunter_85, claimed to have filmed it in the forests of Northern California. Heart-pounding, I reached out via private message. To my surprise, I received a response almost immediately. The user was cautious at first, but as we exchanged details of our encounters, a tentative trust began to form. Her name was Lena, and she had her own harrowing tale of survival. We agreed to meet, both of us desperate for an ally who understood the nightmare we'd lived through. The small diner on the outskirts of Redding was nearly empty when I arrived. Lena was easy to spot. Her eyes had the same haunted look I saw in the mirror every day. As we talked, the pieces began to fall into place. Her encounter had been 3 years ago, in a different location, but with chilling similarities to my own experience. "They're spreading," Lena said, her voice low and intense. "I've been tracking sightings, disappearances. It's not just isolated incidents anymore. Something big is coming, Malachi, and we might be the only ones who can stop it." She pulled out a laptop, showing me the data she'd compiled. Clusters of unexplained disappearances, reports of strange howls in the night, grainy photos that might or might not show twisted, inhuman shapes. It was circumstantial, but taken together it painted a terrifying picture. "There's a pattern," I said, excitement and dread warring in my chest. "Look at the dates, the lunar cycle. They're more active around the full moon." Lena nodded grimly. "Which means we have less than a week until their next hunting cycle begins. We need to act fast." As we pored over maps and formulated plans, a sense of purpose filled me for the first time since that nightmarish encounter in the woods. We were no longer alone in our knowledge of the horrors that stalked the night. Together, perhaps, we stood a chance of exposing the truth and saving countless lives. But even as hope blossomed, a chill ran down my spine. The creatures had proven cunning and ruthless. If they realized we were onto them, there was no telling how they might retaliate. As Lena and I left the diner, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that inhuman eyes were following our every move from the deepening shadows. The final confrontation was approaching, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Either we would bring the monsters into the light, or we would join the ranks of their nameless, forgotten victims. As we parted ways, each heading off to make our final preparations, I silently vowed that this time I would not be the prey. Whatever the cost, the truth would be revealed. The full moon hung low and bloated in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the forest. Lena and I crouched in the underbrush, our breath misting in the chill night air. We had chosen this spot carefully, based on our analysis of previous attacks and the creature's hunting patterns. Our plan was simple, if desperate. We would lure one of the monsters into the open, capturing evidence of its existence on the high-resolution cameras we'd set up around the clearing. It was risky, but we were out of options. The authorities remained skeptical, and time was running out. Hours passed in tense silence. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. Beside me, Lena was a statue, her eyes constantly scanning the tree line. It was well past midnight when we heard it. A low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, my body instinctively recognizing a predator far deadlier than anything natural evolution had produced. Lena's hand found mine in the darkness, squeezing tightly. This was it, the moment of truth. Either we would finally have our proof, or I didn't let myself finish the thought. A shape detached itself from the shadows at the edge of the clearing. In the moonlight, I could make out the now familiar twisted form, the elongated limbs and hunched posture. Its head swiveled, nostrils flaring as it scented the air. Lena and I held our breath, willing the cameras to capture every detail. The creature took another step into the clearing, and I felt a surge of triumph. We had done it. No one could deny the evidence now. But then everything went horribly wrong. A twig snapped beneath my foot as I shifted position. The creature's head snapped towards us, red eyes gleaming with predatory intelligence. With a bone-chilling howl, it charged. What followed was a blur of violence and terror. We fought with everything we had, the specially prepared weapons we'd brought, the survival skills honed by our previous encounters. But the creature was stronger, faster, driven by an inhuman hunger. I saw Lena fall, heard her scream of pain cut short. Rage and grief gave me a surge of strength, and I managed to drive the monster back, giving myself a moment's respite. As I stood there, bleeding and gasping for breath, a horrible realization dawned. We had been fools. These creatures, these monsters, they were not some newly discovered species. They were something far older, far more terrifying. Flashes of half-remembered folklore and myth raced through my mind. Werewolves, skinwalkers, wendigos. Every culture had its stories of humans transformed into bestial predators. We had dismissed them as superstition, but the truth had been there all along, hiding in plain sight. The creature circled me, lips pulled back in a snarl that was almost a grin. In its eyes I saw not just hunger, but a twisted kind of recognition. It knew what I had realized, and it was savoring the moment. As it tensed to spring, I closed my eyes, offering a silent apology to all those I had failed to save. At least now, with the cameras running, the truth would finally come to light. Others would take up the fight, armed with the knowledge we had paid for in blood. The monster's howl of triumph turned to a yelp of pain. My eyes snapped open to see Lena, bloodied but alive, emptying her pistol into the creature's back. It thrashed and howled, black ichor spurting from its wounds. With a final titanic effort, I raised my own weapon and fired. The shot caught the monster square between its glowing red eyes. It collapsed, twitching, then lay still. Lena and I clung to each other, hardly daring to believe we had survived. As the adrenaline faded, the full weight of what we had discovered settled over us. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Dawn was breaking as we limped out of the forest, battered and forever changed. We had our proof now, captured on camera for all the world to see. But we also had a burden of knowledge that could never be unlearned. The monsters were real. They walked among us, hidden in plain sight until the moon's pull revealed their true nature. And now that we knew the truth, we could never again close our eyes to the horrors that lurked in the shadows. As we emerged from the tree line, the rising sun painted the sky in hues of pink and gold. It was a new day, but the night would always be waiting, and we would be ready. The dashboard clock read 6:47 p.m. as I guided my weathered RV down the winding road toward Lake Shasta. Golden hour sunlight filtered through the pines, casting long shadows across the asphalt. I'd been on the road for months, chasing solitude and adventure across the American wilderness, but something about this place felt different. A tingling anticipation mixed with an inexplicable unease. I'm Daniel Reyes, 40 years old, and what I'm about to tell you defies rational explanation. But I swear on everything I hold dear that it's the truth. Last spring, I embarked on what was supposed to be a routine week-long trip to Lake Shasta, California. For the past 2 years, I'd been living nomadically, traveling the country in my RV and documenting my experiences for my moderately successful YouTube channel, Off the Grid with Daniel. What started as a midlife crisis after my divorce had evolved into a genuine passion for wilderness survival and a growing online following. This particular excursion was meant to be another notch in my belt, a chance to explore the famous Shasta caverns and test my skills in the surrounding wilderness. I'd read about the cave system's stunning limestone formations and underground lakes, but it was the challenge of navigating its maze-like passages that really drew me in. The area's remote location promised the solitude I craved, far from cell service and the constant hum of civilization. As I neared my destination, the dense forest pressed in on both sides of the road. The fading sunlight barely penetrated the canopy, and I found myself hunching forward over the steering wheel, straining to see. A weathered sign welcomed me to Shasta Trinity National Forest, the paint peeling and faded by years of harsh weather. I pulled into the nearly empty visitor center parking lot just as the staff were closing up for the day. A woman in a park ranger uniform was locking the front door as I approached. "Excuse me," I called out, jogging the last few steps. I was hoping to get some information about camping in the area. She turned, surprise flickering across her face before settling into a polite smile. "You're cutting it a bit close, aren't you? We're about to close up shop." "Sorry about that. I'm Daniel Reyes," I said, extending my hand. "I'm planning to camp here for about a week, explore the caverns. I was hoping to get some maps or trail information before heading out." The ranger's handshake was firm, her palm calloused from years of outdoor work. "Maggie Coates," she replied, "local historian and de facto welcoming committee." Her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled, but there was a wariness there too, barely concealed. "You camping out here alone?" Maggie asked, raising an eyebrow. I nodded, gesturing back toward my RV. "Yeah, just me and my home on wheels. I've got a YouTube channel where I document my solo camping trips, test out survival skills, that sort of thing." Maggie's frown deepened. "You ever hear the stories about this place?" "Stories?" I asked, curiosity piqued. She glanced around as if making sure we were alone, then lowered her voice. "Back in the 1800s, a group of settlers got trapped here during a particularly harsh winter, ran out of food. Some say they turned on each other." She paused, her gaze drifting toward the darkening forest. "People talk about something that came out of those caves after that winter, something that wasn't quite human anymore." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Sounds like prime material for my channel. Maybe I'll do a spooky campfire story video." Maggie didn't laugh. "It's all nonsense, of course," she said, but her tone suggested otherwise. "But I wouldn't stay out after dark if I were you. These woods can play tricks on your mind, especially when you're alone." I assured her I'd be careful, but I could tell from her tight smile that she knew I wouldn't heed her warning. After providing me with a map and some basic safety information, Maggie bid me goodnight and drove off, leaving me alone in the rapidly dimming parking lot. As I made my way back to the RV, a cool breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the earthy scent of decaying leaves and damp soil. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, unseen eyes tracking my every move from the depths of the forest. I shook my head, trying to dispel the creeping unease. I was letting Maggie's stories get to me, nothing more. I'd spent countless nights alone in the wilderness. This was no different. But as I fired up the RV's engine and pulled out of the lot, heading deeper into the forest toward my intended campsite, a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. Maybe this time I had bitten off more than I could chew. The shadows lengthened, darkness encroaching from all sides as I drove on. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the wind, I could have sworn I heard a faint, mournful cry. The last traces of daylight had faded by the time I found a suitable spot to set up camp. I maneuvered the RV into a small clearing about a mile from the cavern entrance, surrounded by towering pines that seemed to scrape the star-studded sky. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles and distant water. As I stepped out of the RV, the silence hit me like a physical force. No distant hum of traffic, no chatter of fellow campers, just the soft rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze and the occasional hoot of an owl. It was the kind of quiet I usually cherished, but tonight it felt oppressive, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I shook off the feeling and set about making camp. Years of experience had honed my routine to efficient precision. Within an hour, I had a small fire crackling, camp chair set up, and my filming equipment ready for the morning. I even strung up some solar-powered fairy lights between the trees, partly for ambiance and partly to ward off the encroaching darkness. As I sat by the fire, warming my hands and planning the next day's hike, a twig snapped in the darkness beyond the firelight. I jerked my head up, scanning the shadows. Nothing moved. Probably just a deer, I told myself, but I couldn't shake the prickling sensation at the back of my neck. I cleared my throat, suddenly aware of how loud my breathing sounded in the stillness. "Hello?" I called out, immediately feeling foolish. Of course there was no one out there. I was miles from the nearest campsite. Still, I found myself speaking aloud, if only to break the unnerving silence. "All right, Daniel," I muttered. "Let's go over the plan for tomorrow." I pulled out my map, tracing the route to the caverns with my finger. Head out at dawn, reach the cave entrance by mid-morning, spend a few hours exploring, get some good footage for the channel, then back to camp before dark. A gust of wind whispered through the trees, and for a moment I could have sworn I heard my name carried on the breeze. "Daniel." I froze, straining my ears, but the sound didn't repeat. "Get a grip," I chided myself. "You're letting that ranger's ghost stories get to you." Still, I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often as I prepared for bed, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Inside the RV, with the door securely locked, I felt marginally better. I pulled out my laptop, intending to review some footage from earlier in the trip, but found myself Googling the history of Lake Shasta instead. Most of what I found was typical tourist information: beautiful scenery, great fishing, the dam's construction in the 1940s. But buried in the search results, I found an old newspaper article that made my blood run cold. Dated 1887, it detailed the disappearance of a group of settlers in the area. The search party found their camp abandoned, food stores untouched. The only clue was a journal, its final entry a cryptic warning. "It watches us now. It waits for us to fall apart." I slammed the laptop shut, my heart racing. It was just a coincidence, I told myself. Old settlements in remote areas often fell victim to harsh winters or disease. There was nothing supernatural about it. Yet as I lay in bed that night, sleep eluding me, I couldn't shake the image of glowing eyes, watching from the forest, patient and hungry. The wind picked up, branches scraping against the RV's roof like skeletal fingers. And then, just as I was drifting off, I heard it. A cry for help, distant but clear, coming from the direction of the caves. I sat bolt upright, straining my ears. Seconds ticked by in silence. Had I imagined it? The cry came again, faint but unmistakable, a human voice filled with terror and pain. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to lock the doors and wait for daylight. But what if someone was really in trouble out there? Heart pounding, I pulled on my boots and jacket. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight and, after a moment's hesitation, the hunting knife I kept for emergencies. With a deep breath, I unlocked the RV door and stepped out into the oppressive darkness of the forest night. The beam of my flashlight seemed feeble against the pitch-black woods. I swept it in an arc, searching for any sign of movement. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and afraid. "Is anyone there? Do you need help?" Silence answered me. Even the wind had died down, leaving the forest unnaturally still. I took a few hesitant steps toward where I thought I'd heard the cry. Leaves crunched underfoot, the sound jarringly loud. That's when I saw it, a flicker of movement just at the edge of my light's beam. A pale shape, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. But the glimpse I caught sent ice through my veins. A gaunt, elongated figure, its limbs too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in short gasps. The flashlight beam danced wildly as my hand shook. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. No answer came, but as I retreated toward the relative safety of my RV, I could have sworn I heard a low, guttural chuckle emanating from the depths of the forest. I slammed the door shut behind me, fumbling with shaking hands to lock it. Sleep was impossible now. I sat at the small dining table, knife close at hand, staring out the window until the first pale light of dawn began to creep through the trees. Whatever I had seen or thought I had seen was gone, leaving me to wonder if it had all been a product of my overstimulated imagination. But as the new day dawned, bringing with it the cheerful songs of waking birds, one thing was certain: my little adventure in the Shasta wilderness had taken a turn I never could have anticipated. And deep down I knew this was only the beginning. The morning sun did little to dispel the unease that had settled over me like a heavy blanket. As I prepared for my hike to the caverns, I found myself jumping at every snapping twig and rustle of leaves. The rational part of my brain insisted that last night's events were nothing more than an overactive imagination fueled by campfire stories and isolation. But a primal instinct, buried deep in my psyche, whispered that something was terribly wrong in these woods. I went through my usual routine of checking my gear and setting up my camera for the day's footage. My viewers were expecting another adventure-filled episode, and I was determined not to let my nerves get the better of me. "Hey guys, Daniel here with another off-the-grid episode," I said to the camera, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. "Today we're exploring the famous Shasta Caverns. Stay tuned for some incredible underground scenery." The hike to the cave entrance was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every so often I'd whirl around, certain I'd catch a glimpse of something following me, but there was never anything there, just trees and shadows. The cavern entrance loomed before me, a gaping maw in the hillside that seemed to swallow the sunlight. A wooden sign warned visitors about the dangers of caving and advised against entering without a guide. I hesitated, my hand brushing the cool stone of the entrance. It wasn't too late to turn back, to pack up camp and leave this place behind. But my pride and curiosity won out. I switched on my headlamp and stepped into the darkness. The temperature dropped immediately, and the musty smell of damp earth and ancient stone enveloped me. My footsteps echoed off the walls, creating a disorienting cacophony. I moved slowly, filming as I went, marveling at the otherworldly beauty of the limestone formations. "As you can see," I narrated for my viewers, "these caverns are a natural wonder. Some of these stalactites and stalagmites have been forming for millions of years." I pressed deeper into the cave system, the passage gradually narrowing. The beauty of the caverns was undeniable, but an oppressive feeling began to grow with each step I took. The air felt thick, almost alive, pressing against my skin. After about an hour of careful exploration, I reached a large chamber. My headlamp barely penetrated the darkness, giving the impression of an endless void. As I panned my camera around, something caught my eye, a glint of metal in a far corner. Curious, I made my way over, nearly tripping on the uneven ground. There, half buried in the silt, was an old knife. Its blade was rusted, the wooden handle rotted, but it was unmistakably man-made. "Now this is interesting," I murmured, picking it up carefully. "Looks like it could be over 100 years old." Next to where the knife had lain, I spotted something else, a small, leather-bound book. My heart raced as I carefully opened it, the brittle pages threatening to crumble at my touch. It was a journal, the faded ink barely legible in the beam of my headlamp. I read aloud, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. December 18th, 1886. "The snow won't stop. We're trapped. Food's running low. The others talk of trying to find a way out, but I fear we're too weak. And there's something else. Something out there in the storm. We hear it at night, calling. God help us." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cave's temperature. This had to be from the settlers Maggie had mentioned, the ones who disappeared. I flipped to the last entry, dated nearly a month later. "It watches us now. It waits for us to fall apart. We should never have come to this cursed place. If anyone finds this, stay away. It's always hungry." The words seemed to hang in the air, filling the chamber with an almost palpable dread. And then, as if in response to the journal's warning, I heard it, a low, guttural growl emanating from the depths of the cave. I spun around, my headlamp beam dancing wildly across the rocky walls. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Is someone there?" The growl came again, closer this time, accompanied by the sound of something large moving in the darkness just beyond my light's reach. Panic seized me. I shoved the journal into my backpack and bolted for the passage I'd come through. I ran blindly, my headlamp bouncing erratically, casting nightmarish shadows on the cave walls. The sound of pursuit echoed behind me, a rhythmic thudding punctuated by that inhuman growl. I burst out of the cave entrance, gasping for air, the bright sunlight momentarily blinding me. I didn't stop running until I reached a small clearing, my lungs burning. Only then did I dare to look back. The cave entrance stood silent, no sign of the terror that had chased me through its depths. But as I stood there, trying to catch my breath and make sense of what had happened, A voice drifted out from the cave, a voice that sounded disturbingly like my own. "Daniel, come back, Daniel, we're waiting for you." I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and ran, not stopping until I reached the safety of my campsite. As I slumped against the RV, my mind raced. What had I stumbled into? And more importantly, how was I going to get out? Little did I know, my ordeal was far from over. The true horrors of Shasta were just beginning to reveal themselves. My hands shook as I fumbled with the RV door, desperate to put a barrier between myself and whatever lurked in the forest. Once inside, I collapsed onto the small sofa, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The journal I'd found weighed heavily in my backpack, a tangible link to the horrors I'd experienced in the cave. As the adrenaline began to fade, doubt crept in. Had it all been real? The rational part of my brain argued that I'd simply spooked myself, that the growls and voice were nothing more than echoes or my imagination running wild. But the fear that gripped me felt all too real. I pulled out the journal with trembling hands, half expecting it to have vanished. But there it was, weathered and ominous. I carefully opened it again, poring over the faded entries. The settlers' descent into terror was palpable in the increasingly frantic handwriting. Whatever had stalked them over a century ago seemed to still haunt these woods. As evening approached, I found myself jumping at every sound, the creak of the RV in the wind, the rustling of leaves outside. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even within the supposed safety of my vehicle. I tried to distract myself by reviewing the footage I'd captured in the cave. Most of it was mundane, beautiful rock formations, my narration about the cave's history. But then I saw it. In the background of one shot, barely visible in the gloom, was a pair of gleaming eyes reflecting my headlamp's beam. I froze the frame, my blood running cold. Those eyes belonged to no animal I recognized. They were too intelligent, too malevolent. A sharp rap on the RV door made me nearly jump out of my skin. "Hello?" called a familiar voice. "Mr. Reyes, are you in there?" Heart pounding, I cautiously approached the door. Through the small window, I could see Maggie Coates, the ranger from the visitor center, standing outside. Her presence was both a relief and a new source of anxiety. I opened the door, trying to compose myself. "Miss Coates," I said, my voice hoarser than I'd expected, "what brings you out here?" Maggie's eyes narrowed as she took in my disheveled appearance. "I was worried after our conversation yesterday," she said. "Thought I'd check in, make sure you're okay." She paused, studying my face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I hesitated, torn between unburdening myself and fearing I'd sound insane. I went to the caves today," I began. Maggie's expression darkened. "And?" The whole story came tumbling out. The journal, the growls, the chase, the eyes in my footage. As I spoke, Maggie's face grew increasingly grave. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. "You shouldn't have gone in there alone," she finally said, her voice low. "The caves, they're not safe." "What's out there?" I demanded. "What's really going on in these woods?" Maggie sighed heavily. "It's not something we talk about with outsiders. But you've seen too much already." She glanced around as if ensuring we weren't overheard. "The settlers' story isn't just a legend. Something changed them that winter. The ones that survived, they weren't human anymore. And whatever they became, it's still out there." A chill ran down my spine. "You're saying it's real? Some kind of monster?" "Monster, spirit, curse. I don't know what to call it," Maggie replied. "But it's dangerous. It hunts. And once it has your scent..." She trailed off, leaving the implications hanging in the air. As if on cue, a long, mournful howl echoed through the forest. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Part wolf, part human scream. Maggie's face went pale. "You need to leave," she said urgently. "Pack up and go now. Don't stop until you're miles away from here." "But my footage, my channel," I began. "Forget the footage," Maggie snapped. "This is about survival now. It's hunting you, Mr. Reyes, and it won't stop until it has you." Another howl, closer this time. Maggie grabbed my arm. "I have to go. Remember, don't trust anything you see or hear out there. It can mimic, lure you in. Just get in your RV and drive." With that, she turned and hurried into the darkness, leaving me alone with the growing chorus of inhuman cries echoing through the trees. I slammed the door shut, my mind reeling. Part of me wanted to follow Maggie's advice to flee immediately, but another part, the stubborn adventurer that had brought me here in the first place, insisted on staying. I had evidence now, the journal, the footage. I could uncover the truth behind this century-old mystery. As I stood there, paralyzed by indecision, a new sound cut through the night, a voice achingly familiar calling from just beyond the campsite. "Daniel, Daniel, help me, please." It was my ex-wife's voice, filled with terror and pain. Logically, I knew it couldn't be her. She was hundreds of miles away. But the primal part of my brain screamed that she was in danger, that I needed to help her. I grabbed my flashlight and knife, my hand on the door handle. Then I remembered Maggie's warning. Don't trust anything you see or hear. The thing out there wasn't my ex-wife. It was using her voice against me, trying to lure me out. Fury replaced fear. How dare this creature use my memories, my emotions as a weapon? "Nice try," I growled at the door, "but I'm not falling for it." The voice changed then, becoming a guttural snarl that was barely recognizable as speech. "Come out, Daniel. You can't hide forever. We're so hungry." I backed away from the door, my resolve strengthening. I wasn't going to be driven out, but I wasn't going to be tricked into becoming prey either. Whatever was out there, whatever dark history haunted these woods, I was going to face it on my own terms. As the night wore on, filled with inhuman cries and the sounds of something large circling my RV, I began to formulate a plan. If I was going to survive this and uncover the truth, I'd need to be smart, be prepared, and above all, be willing to face the darkness head-on. Little did I know, the true test of my resolve was yet to come. Sleep eluded me that night. Every creak and rustle outside the RV sent my heart racing. By the time dawn broke, I was exhausted but resolute. If I was going to survive this ordeal and uncover the truth, I needed a plan. I spent the morning fortifying my campsite. Years of wilderness survival had taught me a thing or two about setting up defenses. I strung up tripwires around the perimeter, attaching them to makeshift alarms, tin cans filled with pebbles. It wasn't much, but it would alert me to any large creature trying to approach. Next, I focused on gathering more information. The journal I'd found in the cave was a start, but I needed more. I set up my laptop, grateful for the solar panels on my RV that allowed me to keep it charged. The internet connection was spotty out here, but it was enough to do some research. I dug deeper into the history of the area, beyond the tourist-friendly tales. Buried in old newspaper archives and local history forums, I found more accounts of disappearances over the years. Hikers, campers, even a few park rangers, all vanished without a trace. The official reports cited animal attacks or getting lost in the wilderness, but reading between the lines, I sensed a cover-up. One forum post caught my eye. It was from someone claiming to be a former Shasta County Sheriff's deputy. They wrote about a series of gruesome killings in the 1970s that were never made public. The details were horrific. Bodies found partially eaten, arranged in bizarre ritualistic patterns. The post was quickly deleted, but not before I'd taken screenshots. As I delved deeper into my research, a pattern began to emerge. The disappearances and strange events seemed to cluster around certain dates, always during the darkest part of winter or the height of summer. It was as if whatever lurked in these woods became more active, more hungry, during the extremes of the seasons. I glanced at my calendar. We were approaching the summer solstice, the longest day of the year. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the implications. If the pattern held true, I was here at the worst possible time. Midway through the afternoon, my makeshift alarm system jangled to life. I grabbed my camera and cautiously peered out the window. At first, I saw nothing. Then, a movement caught my eye. At the edge of the clearing stood a deer, but something was wrong. Its movements were jerky, unnatural. As it turned its head toward the RV, I had to stifle a scream. Where its eyes should have been were empty, weeping sockets. I fumbled with my camera, desperate to capture evidence of what I was seeing. But by the time I got it recording, the deer was gone. All that remained was a strange, elongated footprint in the soft earth where it had stood. My hands shook as I played back the footage. There was nothing, just an empty clearing. Whatever that thing was, it didn't show up on camera. I was beginning to understand why no one had hard evidence of the creature's existence. As evening approached, I steeled myself for another long night. I double-checked my defenses, made sure my knife was within reach, and settled in to review my notes and footage. That's when I heard it, a soft tapping on the roof of the RV. Tap, 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 like someone gently knocking, asking to be let in. I held my breath, willing it to stop. Instead, a voice drifted down, my own voice but distorted. Wrong. "Daniel," it crooned, "why do you hide from us? We only want to talk, to show you the truth." I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voice seemed to be inside my head now. "You're so close to understanding," it continued. "Just open the door, let us in. We can show you wonders beyond your imagination." Part of me, a small, traitorous part, wanted to obey, to unlock the door and face whatever waited outside. But I remembered Maggie's warning, "Don't trust anything you see or hear." "No," I growled through clenched teeth. "You're not real. Leave me alone." A hiss of frustration, then silence. The presence on the roof was gone, but I knew it hadn't gone far. It was waiting, watching, looking for any sign of weakness. As I sat there in the growing darkness, clutching my useless camera and a journal full of century-old warnings, I realized the truth of my situation. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't even about uncovering a mystery for my YouTube channel. I was in a war for my sanity, my soul, and quite possibly the fate of anyone else who might stumble into these woods in the future. And right now, I was losing. But as fear threatened to overwhelm me, a new emotion surged forward. Determination. I hadn't come this far, survived this long, to give up now. Whatever was out there, whatever it wanted from me, I wasn't going to make it easy for them. As the creature's howls began again in the distance, I started to formulate a new plan. If I couldn't capture this thing on camera, I'd find another way to prove its existence. And if I couldn't escape it, well, maybe it was time to turn the tables, to become the hunter instead of the hunted. With trembling hands but a steely resolve, I began to prepare for what I knew would be the fight of my life. The next morning dawned gray and misty, the forest shrouded in an eerie fog that seemed to muffle all sound. I had barely slept, spending most of the night poring over my notes and formulating a plan. If I couldn't capture this thing on camera, I'd have to find another way to prove its existence, and hopefully find a way to stop it. I began by taking stock of my supplies, my hunting knife, a flare gun, some rope, and a first aid kit. Not exactly an arsenal, but it would have to do. I also had my survival gear, water purification tablets, emergency rations, a compass. I packed it all into my backpack, along with the old journal I'd found in the cave. Before leaving the relative safety of my RV, I set up my camera on a tripod, aimed at the clearing. Even if the creature didn't show up on film, maybe I could catch some evidence of its presence. Moving branches, disturbed earth, anything. Taking a deep breath, I stepped outside. The air was thick and damp, carrying the musty scent of decay. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, unseen eyes tracking my every move from the depths of the misty forest. My plan was simple, if dangerous. Instead of waiting for the creature to come to me, I would go to it. I would retrace my steps to the cave where I'd found the journal, laying traps along the way. If I could injure it, slow it down, maybe I could study it, find a weakness. As I made my way through the forest, I set up snares and pit traps, using techniques I'd learned over years of wilderness survival. But with each trap I laid, doubt gnawed at me. Would these simple devices be enough against something that had terrorized these woods for over a century? The closer I got to the cave, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The fog seemed to thicken, muffling my footsteps and disorienting me. More than once, I found myself turning in circles, relying on my compass to stay on course. Finally, the dark maw of the cave loomed before me. I hesitated at the entrance, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But I had come too far to give up now. Switching on my headlamp, I ventured into the darkness. The beam seemed feeble against the absolute blackness of the cave. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, the sound echoing ominously. I made my way deeper into the cave system, retracing my steps from 2 days ago. The chamber where I'd found the journal looked different now, smaller, more claustrophobic. The walls seemed to pulse in the beam of my headlamp, as if the very rock was alive and breathing. A sound behind me made me whirl around. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of something. A tall, gaunt figure, its limbs too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. Then it was gone, melting into the shadows faster than my eyes could track. My heart pounding, I backed away, only to feel something brush against my shoulder. I spun again, slashing wildly with my knife. The blade met nothing but air. A low chuckle echoed through the chamber, seeming to come from all directions at once. "Oh, Daniel," my own voice mocked me from the darkness. "Did you really think you could hunt us? We've been hunting your kind for longer than you can imagine." I gripped my knife tighter, trying to control my ragged breathing. "What are you?" I demanded. "What do you want?" "Want?" The voice chuckled again. "We want what we've always wanted, to feed, to grow, to become." A rustling sound behind me. I turned just in time to see a pale, elongated hand reaching for me. I slashed at it with my knife, feeling a moment of resistance as the blade connected. A shriek of pain and rage filled the cave, so loud it made my ears ring. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I ran, my headlamp beam bouncing wildly as I fled through the twisting passages. I burst out of the cave into the misty forest, not daring to look back. I ran until my lungs burned, finally collapsing against a tree, gasping for breath. As my panic subsided, I realized two things. First, I had injured it. The creature could be hurt, which meant it could potentially be killed. Second, in my haste to escape, I had gotten turned around. The fog-shrouded forest looked the same in every direction. I was lost. Night was falling, and with it the temperature was dropping rapidly. I needed to find shelter, to regroup and plan my next move. But as darkness crept in and strange howls began to echo through the trees, I knew one thing for certain. The hunter had become the hunted, and the real battle for survival was just beginning. The forest had become a maze of shadows and mist. Every tree looked the same, every sound a potential threat. I stumbled through the gathering darkness, my breath coming in ragged gasps, straining my ears for any sign of pursuit. The wound I'd inflicted on the creature in the cave had bought me some time, but I knew it wouldn't last. These woods were its domain, and I was hopelessly lost within them. As full night descended, the temperature plummeted. The thin jacket I wore did little to ward off the chill, and my breath came out in visible puffs. I needed shelter, and fast. After what felt like hours of aimless wandering, I came across a small outcropping of rocks. It wasn't much, but it would provide some protection from the elements and potential attacks. I wedged myself into a narrow crevice, my back pressed against the cold stone. From my backpack, I pulled out the old journal I'd found in the cave. Its pages held the desperate scribblings of those who'd faced this horror before me. Maybe, just maybe, there was something in here that could help me survive the night. By the dim light of my headlamp, I pored over the brittle pages. Most of it was a litany of terror and despair, but one entry caught my eye. "The thing fears fire. When we lit the torches, it retreated into the shadows, but the flames don't last long enough. It waits, patient, hungry." Fire. Of course, it was a primal defense against predators, and apparently it worked on this creature too, but starting a fire would also give away my position. It was a risk I'd have to take. With shaking hands, I gathered what dry kindling I could find nearby. My survival training kicked in, and soon I had a small fire crackling in front of my shelter. Its warmth was comforting, but the flickering shadows it cast made every tree seem alive with menace. As I huddled by the fire, a twig snapped in the darkness beyond the firelight. I froze, straining my eyes to pierce the gloom. Nothing moved, but I could feel eyes upon me, watching, waiting. "I know you're out there," I called out, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Why don't you show yourself?" A low chuckle drifted from the mist, a sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Daniel," my own voice answered, distorted and wrong. "Always so brave, so foolish. Do you think your little fire will save you? We've waited a century for someone like you. We can wait a little longer." I gripped my knife tighter, my knuckles white. "What do you mean, someone like me?" "Someone with spirit, with fight," the voice purred. "The others, they broke so easily, but you'll be a feast for the ages." A rustling to my left. I whirled, brandishing my knife, but saw only mist and shadows. The creature was toying with me, wearing down my resolve. As the night wore on, I fought to stay awake, to keep the fire burning. Every sound, every shadow became a potential threat. More than once I caught glimpses of pale, elongated limbs at the edge of the firelight, gone as soon as I turned to look. In those long, terrifying hours, I began to understand the true nature of the horror I faced. This wasn't just a physical threat, a monster to be defeated. It was something older, something that fed on fear as much as flesh. It was patient, relentless, and it knew every dark corner of my mind. As dawn finally began to lighten the eastern sky, I allowed myself a moment of hope. I had survived the night, but as I stood stretching my cramped muscles, I realized the creature's true strategy. In running from it, in letting it chase me through the forest, I had become hopelessly lost. My supplies were dwindling, and I was no closer to finding my way back to my RV or to civilization. The mist began to clear with the rising sun, revealing unfamiliar terrain in every direction. I was deep in the wilderness now, in the creature's territory. And as I shouldered my pack and prepared to move on, I knew one thing with grim certainty. This was far from over. The real test of survival was just beginning. As the sun climbed higher, I made a decision. I couldn't keep running, couldn't let this thing dictate the terms of our confrontation. It was time to make a stand. I spent the day preparing. Using skills honed over years of wilderness survival, I fashioned crude weapons, spears hardened in the fire, slings made from strips of my backpack. I set traps around a small clearing, creating a battleground of my choosing. As dusk approached, I lit a large fire in the center of the clearing. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. As darkness fell, an unnatural mist began to creep into the clearing. With it came that now familiar voice, my own twisted into something inhuman. "Are you ready, Daniel?" it crooned. "Ready to become part of something greater?" I stood my ground, heart pounding but resolved. "Show yourself," I demanded. "Let's end this." A chuckle drifted from the mist. "As you wish." It emerged slowly, its form solidifying from the mist. It was vaguely humanoid, but wrong in every way. Limbs too long, skin pale and translucent, eyes glowing with an otherworldly hunger. As it fully materialized, I saw the wound I'd inflicted in the cave, a gash across its chest, oozing a black ichor. "What are you?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. "We are hunger," it replied. "We are the void that waits in the dark places of the world. And you, Daniel, will feed us for a long, long time." It lunged forward with impossible speed. I dove to the side, triggering one of my traps. A net of vines fell, entangling the creature. It shrieked in rage, thrashing against its bonds. I didn't waste the opportunity. I hurled one of my fire-hardened spears, driving it deep into the creature's shoulder. Black ichor sprayed from the wound, hissing where it hit the ground. But the creature wasn't finished. With a sound like tearing fabric, it shredded the vine net. Its form seemed to ripple and shift, wounds closing before my eyes. "You cannot win," it snarled, advancing again. "We are eternal. We are legion." As it spoke, I saw movement in the mist behind it, more shapes emerging, twisted, hungry forms drawn by the promise of prey. Desperation fueled me. I grabbed a burning branch from the fire, wielding it like a torch. The creatures hissed and recoiled from the flames. That's when I understood. Fire didn't just hurt them, it unmade them. These things, whatever they were creatures of mist and shadow, and light was their bane. With a yell, I charged forward, swinging my makeshift torch. The lead creature shrieked as the flames touched it, its form dissolving into mist. The others retreated, melting back into the shadows. I pressed my advantage, setting fire to the underbrush around the clearing. Soon a wall of flame surrounded us, driving the mist back. The main creature, the one that had tormented me for days, stood alone now. In the firelight, I saw fear in its glowing eyes for the first time. "It's over," I said, advancing with my torch. It snarled, a cornered predator. "This changes nothing. We are part of these woods now. We will endure. We will feed." "Not anymore," I replied. And with that, I hurled my torch directly at it. The creature went up like dry tinder, its unearthly screams echoing through the forest. As it burned, I saw its form shift and change. Flashes of all the victims it had consumed over the decades, their faces contorted in agony before dissolving into ash. When it was over, nothing remained but a scorch mark on the forest floor. Exhausted, I sank to my knees. It was done. But as I looked around at the burning forest, I realized I had a new problem. The fire was spreading, and I was still lost in the wilderness. That's when I heard it. The distant thrum of helicopter blades. The forest fire had drawn attention. As I stumbled out into a larger clearing, I saw the search and rescue chopper circling overhead. The official report listed me as a lucky survivor of an accidental forest fire. Maggie Coates, the ranger who had warned me, corroborated enough of my story to avoid me being charged with arson. But I knew the full truth would never be believed. I never posted the footage from that trip to my YouTube channel. Some mysteries, I realized, are better left unsolved. But I kept the journal I found in the cave, a reminder of the thin line between our world and the dark things that lurk just out of sight. Sometimes on dark nights I still hear that voice, my voice, calling from the shadows. And I wonder, did I really defeat the horror in those woods? Or did I just become part of a larger, older cycle? One thing I know for certain, I'll never look at a forest the same way again, because now I know what waits in the mist, patient and hungry, for those who wander too far from the light. The gentle hum of my RV's engine faded as I pulled into the secluded spot near Devil's Gate Dam. Through the windshield I could see the looming concrete structure, a gray monolith against the fading light of dusk. I let out a long breath, feeling the weight of the past few months finally start to lift. My name is Elliot Graves, and at 42, I never expected to find myself unemployed and living out of a recreational vehicle. But life has a way of throwing curveballs, and my recent layoff from the tech company where I'd worked for over a decade had been a doozy. As I stepped out of the RV, the warm California air enveloped me. The scent of dry grass and distant water filled my nostrils. I stretched, working out the kinks from the long drive, and took in my surroundings. The Arroyo Seco stretched out before me, a ribbon of parched earth where water once flowed freely. Scrub brush and hardy trees dotted the landscape, their leaves rustling softly in the evening breeze. In the distance, the San Gabriel Mountains loomed, their peaks catching the last rays of sunlight. I'd chosen this spot carefully, away from the more popular camping areas. Privacy was essential for what I had planned. Opening the RV's side compartment, I pulled out my camera equipment, a high-end DSLR, a couple of GoPros, and a drone for aerial shots. This wasn't just a camping trip, it was the start of something new. For years I'd nursed a passion for history and filmmaking on the side, creating small documentaries about local legends and forgotten stories. Now, with nothing but time on my hands and a severance package to fund my endeavors, I was ready to turn that hobby into something more. Devil's Gate Dam was to be the subject of my first real project, the pilot episode of a YouTube series exploring the dark corners of California's history. The dam had it all: eerie legends, a history of occult activity, and a string of unexplained disappearances dating back decades. It was the perfect mix of fact and folklore to capture an audience's attention. As I set up my equipment, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The dam's reputation was unsettling, to say the least. Stories of Jack Parsons, the rocket scientist and occultist who had conducted rituals here in the 1940s, swirled in my mind. Tales of hikers going missing without a trace, of strange lights and unexplained sounds echoing through the canyon at night. I shook my head, trying to dispel the creeping unease. I was here as a skeptic, after all. My goal was to separate fact from fiction, to shine a light on the real history of this place, and debunk the wild claims that had sprung up around it. As the last of the daylight faded, I fired up my camera and began my first recording. "This is Elliot Graves, and I'm standing at the foot of Devil's Gate Dam," I spoke into the lens, my voice steady despite the flutter of nervousness in my stomach. Over the next few days, I'll be exploring the history and mysteries surrounding this infamous location. Is it truly a portal to the underworld, as some claim, or just an old dam with a dark past and an overactive local imagination? I continued filming as night fell, capturing the play of shadows across the dam's weathered surface. The concrete structure seemed to absorb the darkness, becoming a black void against the star-studded sky. As I wrapped up the evening shoot, a sudden chill ran down my spine. For a moment I could have sworn I heard something, a whisper on the wind, too faint to make out but undeniably there. I turned, scanning the darkness, but saw nothing but the silent landscape. Shaking off the feeling, I packed up my gear and headed back to the RV. It was just my imagination, I told myself. The power of suggestion brought on by the dam's reputation and the isolation of my surroundings. Yet as I settled in for the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something out there in the darkness was watching, waiting. Little did I know my skepticism was about to be put to the test in ways I could never have imagined. I woke early the next morning, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage and chaparral. As I stepped out of the RV, stretching my stiff muscles, I noticed how quiet it was. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just an eerie stillness that seemed to blanket the entire area. Shaking off my unease, I set about making breakfast and planning my day. I spread my research materials across the small fold-out table. Old newspaper clippings, printouts of online articles, and a worn topographical map of the area. My fingers traced the contours of the map, following the line of the Arroyo Seco to where it intersected with the dam. As I sipped my coffee, I reviewed my notes on the dam's history. Constructed in 1920, Devil's Gate Dam was the first flood-control dam in Los Angeles County. Its name came from a rock formation nearby that resembled a horned devil, a formation that was now submerged beneath the reservoir. But it wasn't the dam's official history that had drawn me here. It was the darker stories, the whispered legends that had grown around this place over the decades. I pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1956. Fourth child vanishes near Devil's Gate. Police baffled. The article detailed the disappearance of a 10-year-old boy, the fourth child to go missing in the area in less than 2 years. Despite extensive searches, no trace of any of the children had ever been found. I frowned, tapping my pen against the table. These disappearances were often linked in local lore to the occult activities of Jack Parsons, the brilliant but troubled rocket scientist who had conducted rituals in the area in the 1940s. Parsons, along with L. Ron Hubbard, yes, that L. Ron Hubbard, had performed something they called the Babylon Working, a series of rituals intended to summon a divine feminine being. It all sounded like so much pseudoscientific nonsense to me, but I couldn't deny the persistent rumors of strange occurrences in the area since those rituals. Hikers reporting disembodied voices, unexplained lights in the night sky, and a pervasive sense of dread that seemed to emanate from the dam itself. Finishing my coffee, I gathered my camera equipment and headed out. The morning light cast long shadows across the dry riverbed as I made my way towards the dam. The concrete structure loomed larger as I approached, its gray surface pitted and stained with age. I set up my camera and began filming, providing a detailed description of the dam and its surroundings for my future audience. As I spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Several times I paused, certain I'd caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. But each time I turned to look, there was nothing there but rocks and scrub brush. It was nearing midday when I heard the sound of approaching footsteps. Turning, I saw a man walking towards me. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with a weathered face and a permanent scowl. He wore the uniform of a maintenance worker. "You camping out here?" he asked, eyeing my camera equipment suspiciously. "Yeah, just for a few days," I replied, lowering my camera. "I'm Elliot Graves. I'm working on a documentary about the history of the dam." The man's scowl deepened. "Name's Ray. I work maintenance around here." He paused, looking past me at the dam. "History, huh? There's a lot of bad stuff happened here. People messing with things they shouldn't." My interest piqued. I pulled out my notebook. "Like what? I'd love to hear more about it." Ray shook his head, his eyes never leaving the dam. "You don't want to know, trust me. Just don't hang around after dark, okay? And if you see anything strange, anything at all, you leave. You understand?" Before I could press him further, Ray turned and walked away, muttering something under his breath that I couldn't quite catch. I watched him go, a mix of excitement and unease churning in my stomach. This was exactly the kind of local color I'd hoped to capture for my documentary. As the day wore on, I continued filming, capturing footage of the dam from various angles and recording my narration of its history. But Ray's warning lingered in my mind. and I found myself growing increasingly uneasy as the sun began to sink towards the horizon. The shadows lengthened and the air grew cooler. As twilight approached, I noticed something odd. A low hum seemed to be emanating from the dam, barely audible at first, but growing stronger as darkness fell. I told myself it was just the sound of water moving through the structure, but something about it felt off. As I was packing up my equipment, ready to head back to the RV for the night, I heard it. A whisper so faint I almost missed it. I froze, straining my ears. There it was again, a sound like voices carried on the wind, too indistinct to make out words, but unmistakably there. I spun around, my heart pounding, but saw nothing but the empty landscape and the looming shape of the dam. The whispers faded as quickly as they had come, leaving me alone in the gathering darkness. Shaken, I hurried back to my RV, Ray's warning echoing in my mind. As I locked the door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just scratched the surface of something far deeper and darker than I'd ever imagined. Little did I know this was only the beginning of the terror that awaited me at Devil's Gate Dam. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, a stark contrast to the previous day's clear skies. As I stepped out of the RV, the air felt heavy, almost oppressive. The silence that had unnerved me before now seemed to press in from all sides, broken only by the persistent, low hum emanating from the dam. I tried to shake off my unease as I set up my equipment. Today's plan was to explore the area around the dam, hoping to find any physical evidence of the occult activities that supposedly took place here. As I worked, I couldn't help but replay last night's events in my mind. Those whispers, had they been real, or just my imagination running wild in the dark? About an hour into my search, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. Nestled in a small clearing not far from the dam, I found the remnants of what looked like a ritual site. A crude circle of stones surrounded a blackened patch of earth. Scattered around were burnt scraps of paper covered in strange symbols I didn't recognize. With shaking hands, I took out my camera and began documenting the scene. As I zoomed in on one of the paper scraps, a chill ran down my spine. The symbol looked like a twisted, mutated version of the Thelema unicursal hexagram, a symbol I knew was associated with Aleister Crowley's teachings, which had influenced Jack Parsons. This is incredible, I muttered to myself as I filmed. These look old, but they can't be from Parsons' time. Someone must be continuing the rituals here. As I spoke, the hum from the dam seemed to intensify. I paused, listening. Was it my imagination, or could I hear something else beneath that constant drone? It almost sounded like chanting. Suddenly, my camera shut off. I frowned, checking the battery. It had been full when I started. I tried to turn it back on, but the screen just flickered and went black. "Come on, don't do this to me now," I muttered, frustration mixing with a growing sense of unease. That's when I noticed the shadow. It was just at the edge of my vision, a tall, dark figure standing near the dam. I whirled around, my heart pounding, but there was nothing there, just the dam and the empty landscape. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and frightened even to my own ears. "Is someone there?" No response, just the endless hum of the dam and the whispering wind. I gathered my equipment with trembling hands and hurried back to the RV. As I walked, I could have sworn I heard footsteps behind me, but every time I turned to look, there was nothing. Back in the relative safety of the RV, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. The figure must have been a trick of the light, my mind playing tricks on me after finding that ritual site. And the camera, well, electronics malfunction sometimes, right? But as I sat there trying to calm my racing heart, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The hum from the dam seemed to have followed me, vibrating through the walls of the RV. And underneath it, I could still hear those whispers, growing louder by the moment. I spent the rest of the day inside, poring over my research notes, trying to find some logical explanation for what was happening. As night fell, the whispers grew more insistent. They weren't just random sounds anymore. They were saying my name. "Elliot," they called over and over in a dozen different voices. "Elliot, come to us." I huddled in my bed, hands pressed over my ears, but it didn't help. The voices were inside my head now, calling to me, beckoning me to the dam. At some point, exhaustion must have overtaken me because the next thing I knew, it was morning. or so I thought. I found myself standing at the edge of the dam, my feet bare and wet, clutching the burnt scraps of paper I'd found earlier. I had no memory of leaving the RV, no idea how long I'd been out here. The sky above was a strange twilight gray, not quite night, but far from day. Heart pounding, I looked around, trying to piece together what had happened. The dam looked different in this strange half-light, darker somehow, more alive. My camera sat on a nearby rock, its lens pointed directly at me. With trembling hands, I picked it up and rewound the footage. What I saw made my stomach turn. The video showed me walking towards the dam in the middle of the night, my face blank and expressionless. At one point, I turned to look directly at the camera. My eyes were empty sockets, black and bottomless, and my mouth was twisted into a smile that wasn't my own. I dropped the camera, stumbling backward. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of nightmare. But the chill of the morning air and the damp earth beneath my feet told me this was all too real. As the realization of what was happening began to sink in, panic clawed at my throat. I had to get out of here, now. I turned to run back to the RV, but froze in my tracks. There, blocking my path, stood the shadow figure I'd glimpsed before. But now, in this strange twilight, I could see it clearly. It was tall, inhumanly so, its form rippling like smoke. Where its face should have been, there was only a swirling void. It raised a hand, pointing towards the dam. The meaning was clear. Come. No, I whispered, my voice hoarse with fear. Leave me alone. The figure took a step forward, and I felt the world tilt around me. The whispers returned, louder than ever, drowning out everything else. They filled my head, threatening to shatter my sanity. In that moment, driven by blind terror, I did the only thing I could think of. I turned and ran, not towards the RV, but towards the dam itself. Somehow I knew that the answers I sought, and perhaps my only chance of escape, lay within its dark, foreboding structure. As I plunged into the shadows of Devil's Gate Dam, I had no idea if I would ever emerge again. But I knew one thing for certain. The horror I had come to document had become all too real, and it was far from over. My feet pounded against the damp concrete as I ran into the shadows of Devil's Gate Dam. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the very atmosphere was trying to push me back. But I couldn't stop. The whispers pursued me, a cacophony of voices urging me deeper into the structure. The dam's interior was a maze of narrow passageways and steep staircases. Emergency lights cast a sickly glow, barely penetrating the gloom. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, the sound echoing ominously. I had no idea where I was going, driven purely by the instinct to put as much distance as possible between myself and the shadowy figure outside. As I rounded a corner, I collided with something solid. I stumbled back, my heart leaping into my throat. It was Ray, the maintenance worker I'd met earlier. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with fear. "What are you doing in here?" he hissed, grabbing my arm. "I told you to leave if anything strange happened." I don't know how I got here," I stammered, the events of the past few hours tumbling out in a confused rush. There was something out there, chasing me. I had to run. Ray's grip on my arm tightened. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice low and urgent. "You've awakened them. Now they won't rest until they have you." "Who? What are you talking about?" I demanded, fear and confusion making my voice crack. Before Ray could answer, a low, rumbling growl echoed through the passageway. It wasn't the hum of machinery or the rush of water. This sound was alive, hungry. Ray's face drained of what little color it had left. "Run," he whispered. "Run now and don't look back." He shoved me towards a narrow staircase leading upwards. As I started to climb, I glanced back. Ray stood in the passageway, his body tense. Then, to my horror, I saw shapes moving in the darkness behind him. Writhing, twisted forms that seemed to be made of living shadow. "Ray," I called out, but he didn't move. "Go," he shouted. "Get to the top and find the sigil. It's your only chance." I wanted to help him, but terror propelled me up the stairs. Behind me I heard Ray's scream, abruptly cut short. The sound of many feet, too many feet, scrabbling against concrete followed me as I ran. The staircase seemed endless. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but I didn't dare slow down. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They weren't just saying my name now. They were making promises, offering power, knowledge, things beyond my wildest dreams, if I would just stop running and let them in. Finally, I burst out onto the top of the dam. The twilight sky had turned an angry red like a bruise. The wind howled, carrying with it the stench of decay and something else, something ancient and wrong. I stumbled to the edge of the dam, gasping for breath. Far below, the dry riverbed of the Arroyo Seco seemed to writhe and shift, as if the very earth was coming alive. A cold laugh behind me made me whirl around. There, outlined against the blood-red sky, stood a figure. It looked almost human, but its proportions were all wrong, its limbs too long, its fingers ending in sharp points. Its face was a constantly shifting mask of features, never settling on one form. "Welcome, Elliot," it said, its voice a chorus of whispers. "We've been waiting for you." I backed away, my heel scraping against the edge of the dam. "What are you?" I managed to choke out. The figure's laugh grew louder. "We are the guardians of the gate, the keepers of secrets, and you, Elliot, have been chosen to join us." As it spoke, more shapes emerged from the shadows, twisted, nightmarish forms that defied description. They moved towards me, their intentions clear in their hungry, otherworldly eyes. My mind raced. Ray had mentioned a sigil. My eyes darted around, searching desperately for anything that might resemble the strange symbols I'd seen on those burnt scraps of paper. There, on the concrete near my feet, barely visible beneath years of grime, was a faded symbol. It looked like a combination of the Thelema unicursal hexagram and something older, more primal. Without thinking, I dropped to my knees and began tracing the symbol with my finger, my lips moving in a desperate improvised chant. "By this sign I command you, leave me be, return to your realm. By this sign I—" The figure's laugh turned into a roar of rage. It lunged forward, its form stretching and twisting impossibly. But as its clawed hand reached for me, it struck an invisible barrier. The sigil beneath my fingers began to glow with an eerie blue light. A howl of frustration and anger rose from the creatures surrounding me. The very air seemed to ripple and tear, reality bending under the strain of their fury. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The red sky faded to normal twilight. The howling wind died down to a whisper. The nightmarish figures were gone, leaving me alone on top of the dam. I collapsed, my whole body shaking with exhaustion and residual terror. As the adrenaline faded, the full weight of what I'd experienced crashed down on me. This was real, all of it. The legends, the whispers, the dark forces lurking beneath Devil's Gate Dam. It was all horrifyingly, undeniably real. And somehow, I had survived it. But as I lay there, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky, I knew that my ordeal was far from over. I had glimpsed something beyond the veil of our reality, and I had a sinking feeling that it wasn't done with me yet. With trembling limbs, I pushed myself to my feet. I had to get out of here, had to warn someone. But who would believe me? As I made my way back down the dam, my mind raced with questions. What had happened to Ray? What were those creatures? And most importantly, why had they chosen me? I didn't have answers, but I knew one thing for certain. My life would never be the same again. The darkness I had encountered at Devil's Gate Dam had left its mark on me, and I had a feeling it would be calling me back sooner than I'd like. The walk back to my RV felt like it took hours. Every shadow made me flinch. Every rustle of wind through the dry brush sent my heart racing. By the time I reached the familiar shape of my temporary home, my nerves were frayed to the breaking point. With shaking hands, I unlocked the door and practically fell inside, slamming it shut behind me and engaging every lock. Only then did I allow myself to breathe, sliding down to sit on the floor, my back against the door. For a long time, I just sat there, trying to process everything that had happened. The ritual site, the shadow figures, Ray's disappearance, the nightmarish creatures on top of the dam. It all seemed too fantastical to be real. And yet, the terror I'd felt, the things I'd seen, they were burned into my memory with horrifying clarity. Eventually, I managed to pull myself together enough to stand. I needed to leave, to get as far away from Devil's Gate Dam as possible. But first, I had to gather my equipment and notes. As much as I wanted to forget everything that had happened, I knew I couldn't leave without documentation. If nothing else, I owed it to Ray to try and uncover the truth. As I moved around the RV collecting my things, I caught sight of myself in the small bathroom mirror. I barely recognized the man staring back at me. My face was pale and drawn, dark circles under my eyes. but it was my eyes themselves that truly shocked me. They seemed different somehow, deeper, as if they'd seen things no human was meant to see. I shook my head, trying to clear it. I needed to focus. Grabbing my laptop, I started to download the footage from my camera. To my surprise, most of it was intact, including the chilling video of my sleepwalking episode. As I watched it again, a chill ran down my spine. The empty black sockets where my eyes should have been. What did it mean? Suddenly a thought struck me. The burnt scraps of paper with the strange symbols. Where were they? I distinctly remembered holding them when I found myself at the dam, but now they were nowhere to be seen. Had I dropped them during my frantic run into the dam? Or had they been taken by something else? The loss of this physical evidence was frustrating, but I still had my notes in the footage. It would have to be enough. I finished packing up my gear, my mind already racing with plans. I needed to research more about the history of Devil's Gate Dam, about Jack Parsons and his rituals. There had to be some explanation for what I'd experienced. As I prepared to leave, a wave of exhaustion hit me. I glanced at my watch and was shocked to see that it was nearly dawn. Had I really been up all night? The events at the dam seemed to have distorted my sense of time. Despite my desperation to leave, I knew it wouldn't be safe to drive in my current state. Reluctantly, I decided to try and get a few hours of sleep before hitting the road. I double-checked all the locks, then collapsed onto the small bed, fully clothed. Sleep came surprisingly quickly, but it was far from restful. My dreams were a chaotic swirl of shadowy figures, twisting passageways, and that horrible, hungry growl echoing through the darkness. I woke with a start several times, each time half expecting to find myself back at the dam. When I finally gave up on sleep and dragged myself out of bed, the sun was high in the sky. I made a strong pot of coffee, needing the caffeine to clear the fog from my mind. As I sipped the bitter liquid, I started up my laptop, determined to begin my research immediately. But as the screen flickered to life, my blood ran cold. There, set as my desktop background, was an image I'd never seen before. It showed the top of Devil's Gate Dam at twilight, the sky a deep, unnatural red. And in the center of the image, barely visible but unmistakable, was a tall, shadowy figure with impossibly long limbs. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking so badly I nearly spilled my coffee. How was this possible? I hadn't taken that photo, hadn't changed my desktop background, which meant the realization hit me like a physical blow. Whatever I'd encountered at the dam, it hadn't stayed there. Somehow, it had followed me, and judging by that image, it wasn't done with me yet. As I sat there trying to calm my racing heart, I knew that leaving Devil's Gate Dam behind wouldn't be as simple as driving away. The horror I'd uncovered had latched onto me, and I had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning of a much darker journey. With trembling fingers, I reached for my phone. I needed help, needed someone to talk to who might understand what I was going through. But as I scrolled through my contacts, a chilling thought occurred to me. Who could I possibly trust with this? Who would believe me? I was on my own, trapped between a world I no longer understood and forces I couldn't begin to comprehend. As I stared out the RV window at the sunlit landscape, so normal and peaceful, I realized that my entire perception of reality had been shattered, and I had no idea how to put the pieces back together. The drive away from Devil's Gate Dam was a blur. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see shadowy figures pursuing me. But the road behind remained empty, and gradually, the knot of tension in my chest began to loosen. I drove for hours, putting as much distance between myself and Pasadena as I could. Eventually, fatigue forced me to stop at a nondescript motel just outside of Barstow. As I checked in, I couldn't shake the feeling that the clerk was watching me too closely, her eyes lingering on my disheveled appearance. Once in my room, I immediately set up my laptop and camera, determined to review all the footage I'd captured. But as I connected the camera to my computer, my heart sank. The files were corrupted, reduced to static and indecipherable fragments, all except for one, the video of my sleepwalking episode with those horrifying empty eye sockets. I played it again and again, searching for any clue, any explanation. But each viewing only left me more unsettled. In desperation, I turned to the internet, searching for information about Devil's Gate Dam, Jack Parsons, and occult rituals. Hours passed as I fell down a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories and paranormal forums. Most of it was clearly nonsense, but occasionally I'd come across something that resonated with my experience. Accounts of shadow people, theories about interdimensional portals, discussions of thelemic magic. As the night wore on, I became aware of a low, persistent hum. At first, I thought it was just the air conditioning, but as it grew louder, I recognized it. It was the same hum I'd heard at the dam. Panic rising, I looked around the room. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, more alive, and there, in the mirror above the dresser, I caught a glimpse of movement. A tall, dark figure standing just behind me. I whirled around, but the room was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, my reflection was alone, but my eyes, for a moment, they had looked like empty black sockets. Sleep was out of the question after that. I spent the rest of the night poring over my notes, trying to make sense of everything. By dawn, I had filled several pages with frantic scribblings, connections between Parsons' rituals and ancient summoning rites, theories about the nature of the entities I'd encountered, sketches of the symbols I'd seen. As the first light of day filtered through the curtains, I came to a decision. I couldn't run from this. Whatever had happened at Devil's Gate Dam, whatever had attached itself to me, I needed to understand it, which meant I needed to go back. But not alone. Not this time. I spent the morning making calls, reaching out to paranormal investigators, occult experts, anyone who might be able to help. Most dismissed me as a crank. A few seemed interested but wary. Finally, I got in touch with Dr. Evelyn Marsh, a parapsychologist who had written extensively about liminal spaces and interdimensional phenomena. To my relief, Dr. Marsh agreed to meet me. She was cautious but intrigued by my story, especially when I mentioned the sigil that had protected me on top of the dam. We arranged to meet the next day at a cafe in Pasadena, not far from the dam. As I packed up my things and checked out of the motel, I felt a mix of dread and determination. I was heading back into the lion's den, but this time I wouldn't be unprepared. The drive back to Pasadena was tense. Several times I could have sworn I saw something moving in my peripheral vision, only for it to vanish when I turned to look. The hum was back too, a constant undertone that seemed to vibrate through my bones. As I neared the city limits, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number and contained only 3 words. "Welcome back, Elliot." My hands shook as I pulled into the cafe parking lot. Dr. Marsh was already there, a severe-looking woman in her 50s with piercing gray eyes. As I approached her table, she studied me intently. "Mr. Graves," she said, her voice clipped and professional, "you look like you've seen a ghost." I laughed humorlessly as I sat down. A ghost would have been preferable, Dr. Marsh. What I saw was much, much worse. As I began to recount my experiences, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The shadows in the corners of the cafe seemed to deepen, and that persistent hum grew louder. Dr. Marsh listened intently, her expression grave. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. "Mr. Graves," she said finally, "I believe you've stumbled onto something very dangerous. The entities you describe, the symbols, the phenomena, they all point to a tear in the fabric of reality, a doorway, if you will, to somewhere else." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "We need to go back to Devil's Gate Dam, not to close this doorway. I don't think that's possible. But to understand it, to document it, and perhaps to communicate with whatever lies on the other side." As she spoke, the lights in the cafe flickered. For just a moment, I saw our reflections in the window. Dr. Marsh, myself, and behind us, a tall, shadowy figure with 2 long limbs and a face of swirling darkness. I blinked, and it was gone. But as I turned back to Dr. Marsh, I knew that our return to Devil's Gate Dam would be the beginning of a journey into terrors beyond imagination. And I couldn't shake the feeling that we were playing right into their hands. The drive to Devil's Gate Dam with Dr. Marsh was tense. We rode in silence, the weight of our impending investigation hanging heavy in the air. As we approached, I could feel a change in the atmosphere, a heaviness, as if the very air was charged with an otherworldly energy. Dr. Marsh seemed to sense it too. Her normally composed face tightened, her knuckles white as she gripped her bag of equipment. "The veil is thin here," she murmured almost to herself. We must be cautious. We parked at the same spot where I'd left my RV just days ago. The dam loomed before us, somehow more ominous than I remembered. The low hum that had haunted me since my first visit was now unmistakable, vibrating through the ground beneath our feet. As we gathered our gear, cameras, EMF detectors, and other paranormal investigation equipment, I recounted the layout of the area to Dr. Marsh. I told her about the ritual site I'd found, the interior passages of the dam, and the top where I'd encountered the shadowy entities. "We'll start at the ritual site," Dr. Marsh decided. "If there's a focal point for the paranormal activity, that's likely it." We made our way carefully through the scrub brush. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the landscape. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. When we reached the clearing where I'd found the ritual site, I stopped short. The circle of stones was still there, but it had changed. The stones were arranged in a different pattern, forming a complex geometric shape I didn't recognize. In the center, freshly scorched earth formed the same sigil I'd seen on top of the dam. Dr. Marsh's breath caught. "This is unprecedented," she whispered, her scientific detachment slipping for a moment. She quickly set up her equipment, taking readings and snapping photos. As she worked, I scanned our surroundings. The shadows between the trees seemed to move, shifting in ways that defied natural explanation. And there, just at the edge of my vision, I caught a glimpse of a tall, dark figure. "Dr. Marsh," I said, my voice tight with fear, "we're not alone." She looked up from her instruments, her face pale. "No," she agreed, "we're not. They're coming." As if summoned by her words, the air around us began to ripple. The hum grew louder, becoming a bone-shaking vibration. From the shadows emerged the nightmarish figures I'd seen before. Twisted, elongated forms that hurt the eyes to look at directly. Dr. Marsh stood her ground, pulling a small object from her bag, a pendant inscribed with a symbol similar to the one on the ground. "Stay close to me," she ordered. The entities circled us, their forms flickering and changing. I could hear whispers again, a cacophony of voices speaking in languages I didn't understand. But one word came through clearly, repeated over and over: "Chosen." Dr. Marsh began to chant, her voice steady despite the terror evident in her eyes. The pendant in her hand glowed with an eerie light, creating a barrier around us that the entities couldn't cross. But they didn't retreat. Instead, they began to coalesce, merging into a single massive form that towered over us. It spoke, its voice a chorus of whispers and screams. "You seek knowledge," it said. "You seek understanding. But are you prepared for the price?" Dr. Marsh's chanting faltered. "What price?" she demanded. The entity's form shifted, and suddenly I was looking at a mirror image of myself, but wrong, twisted, with those horrible empty eye sockets. "To see beyond the veil is to be changed forever," my doppelganger said. "Elliot has already begun the transformation. Will you join him, Dr. Marsh? Will you become a bridge between worlds?" I felt a pull, an almost irresistible urge to step outside the protective barrier. Part of me wanted to embrace the darkness, to let it in and see what lay beyond. Dr. Marsh grabbed my arm, her grip painfully tight. "Don't listen," she hissed. "It's trying to manipulate us." But as I looked at her, I saw doubt in her eyes. The same temptation I felt was reflected there, the lure of forbidden knowledge, the chance to see and understand things beyond human comprehension. The entity sensed our hesitation. It pressed closer, the barrier around us flickering. "Choose," it demanded. "Embrace the darkness and gain understanding beyond your wildest dreams, or cling to your fragile reality and live in ignorance." As we stood there, caught between terror and temptation, I realized we had reached a point of no return. Whatever choice we made in this moment would change us forever. The question was, were we ready to pay the price for the truth we sought? The sun had fully set now, leaving us in darkness broken only by the eerie glow of Dr. Marsh's pendant. The entity waited, a palpable sense of anticipation filling the air. In that moment, surrounded by otherworldly horrors and faced with an impossible choice, I understood that our investigation had become something far more dangerous than we could have ever imagined. In that moment of terrible decision, time seemed to stretch. The entity before us, a writhing mass of shadows and whispers, waited with inhuman patience. Dr. Marsh's grip on my arm tightened, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I looked at her, saw the conflict in her eyes, the lifetime of scientific curiosity warring with primal fear. Then I glanced down at my own hands and noticed with horror that they seemed translucent, as if I was fading from this reality. "We have to choose," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Marsh nodded, her face set in grim determination. "Knowledge," she said firmly, "but on our terms." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, ornate box. With trembling hands, she opened it, revealing a crystal that pulsed with an inner light. "A conduit," she explained quickly, "designed to channel and contain ethereal energies. If we can't stop this, we can at least try to control it." The entity recoiled slightly, its form rippling with what might have been surprise or anger. "You dare to think you can contain us?" it hissed. "Not contain," Dr. Marsh replied. "Communicate. Understand. You want a bridge between worlds? Let us be that bridge, but as ourselves, not as your puppets." I caught on to her plan. "You said I was chosen," I addressed the entity. "Then let me choose this. Let us learn, but let us remain human." For a long moment, nothing happened. The air crackled with tension, the hum from the dam reaching a fever pitch. Then suddenly the entity moved. It surged forward, not as an attack, but as if drawn by an irresistible force. The crystal in Dr. Marsh's hand blazed with light, and I felt a rush of something. Knowledge, power, understanding. It poured into us like a flood. Images flashed through my mind, other worlds, other dimensions, realities so foreign they defied description. I saw the true nature of the entities, their role as guardians of gateways between worlds. I understood the significance of Devil's Gate Dam, a nexus point where the barriers between realities wore thin. And I saw more, the rituals of Jack Parsons, the true purpose behind them. The disappearances over the years, not deaths but transcendences, the choice that each person had faced, the same choice we had just made. When it was over, we found ourselves lying on the ground, the crystal between us pulsing softly. The entity was gone, or rather, it was everywhere, in the shadows, in the air, in us. Dr. Marsh sat up slowly, her eyes wide with wonder and residual fear. "Did you?" she began. I nodded, unable to find words for what we'd experienced. We were changed, there was no doubt about that. But we were still ourselves, still human, if only barely. As the first light of dawn broke over the dam, we gathered our equipment in silence. The weight of our new knowledge was heavy, but so was the responsibility that came with it. "What do we do now?" I asked as we walked back to the car. Dr. Marsh was quiet for a moment. "We learn," she said finally. "We document, and we protect. The world isn't ready for this knowledge, but someday it might be. Until then, we're the guardians." I nodded, understanding the magnitude of what she was proposing. We had become more than investigators. We were now keepers of a secret that could reshape humanity's understanding of reality itself. As we drove away from Devil's Gate Dam, I looked back one last time. For a moment I thought I saw a tall, shadowy figure standing atop the dam, watching us leave. But when I blinked, it was gone. The hum that had haunted me for days was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer an external sound, but an internal resonance, a constant reminder of the otherworldly knowledge we now carried. Our journey had ended, but a new one was just beginning. We had sought to uncover the truth behind the legends of Devil's Gate Dam, and in doing so, we had become part of those legends ourselves. As we drove into the rising sun, I knew that our lives would never be the same. We had looked beyond the veil and survived, but the real challenge lay ahead, living with the knowledge of what lurked in the shadows and protecting the world from truths it wasn't yet ready to face. The horror we had encountered at Devil's Gate Dam would stay with us forever, a constant reminder of the thin line between our reality and the unknown. But with that horror came understanding, and with understanding came power. We had paid the price for knowledge, and now we had to bear the weight of it. As Pasadena faded in the rearview mirror, I steeled myself for the journey ahead, knowing that the darkest chapters of our story were yet to be written. I've always been the worrier in my family, especially when it comes to my younger siblings. Perhaps it's the burden of being the eldest, or maybe it's just my nature. But nothing could have prepared me for the story my youngest sister Isabel shared with me after her hiking trip in Colorado 2 years ago. It was a tale that would haunt me for months to come, a stark reminder of nature's unforgiving power and the thin line between adventure and disaster. Isabel had always been the free spirit among us, her early 20s fueling a desire for exploration and new experiences. When she told me about her plans to go hiking in the Colorado mountains with her friend Mia, I felt the familiar twinge of concern, but I pushed it aside, reminding myself that she was an adult now, capable of making her own decisions. "It'll be fine," Isabel had assured me over the phone, her voice brimming with excitement. "We're just going to hike up the mountain, camp overnight, and finish the hike in the morning. Easy peasy." I remember forcing a smile even though she couldn't see it. "Just be careful, okay? Mountains can be unpredictable." "Don't worry so much. We've got this," she laughed, and I could almost see her carefree grin. Little did either of us know then how those words would come back to haunt us. The Colorado mountains held secrets and dangers that neither Isabel nor her friend were prepared for. What was meant to be a simple hiking trip would turn into a nightmare scenario, a brush with death that would leave an indelible mark on all involved. As I recount this story, I ask you to remember that what follows is not a work of fiction. This is a true account of events that transpired in the unforgiving wilderness of Colorado. It's a tale of survival, of human resilience, and of the unexpected horrors that can lurk in even the most beautiful of settings. The mountains have always held a certain allure for people like Isabel. They stand as silent sentinels, their peaks shrouded in mystery, promising adventure and breathtaking vistas to those brave enough to scale their heights. But they also hide dangers, sudden weather changes, treacherous terrain, and the ever-present risk of getting lost or injured far from help. As Isabel and Mia set out on their hike that fateful day, they were blissfully unaware of the ordeal that awaited them. They saw only the beauty of the landscape, the thrill of the climb ahead. The clear blue sky and warm sun gave no hint of the drastic change in weather that was to come. I often wonder if they had known what lay ahead, would they have turned back? Would they have prepared differently? Or would the allure of the mountains still have drawn them upward into an adventure that would test their limits and change their lives forever? These are questions without answers, musings that serve only to underscore the unpredictable nature of life and the wilderness. What I do know is this: the events that unfolded on that mountain would reveal not only the terrifying power of nature, but also the incredible strength of the human spirit in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. As I delve into the details of Isabel's harrowing experience, I invite you to put yourself in her shoes. Imagine the excitement of setting out on a new adventure, the gradual shift from enthusiasm to concern as things begin to go wrong, and finally, the gut-wrenching fear of facing a life-or-death situation in an unforgiving environment. This is not just Isabel's story. It's a story about all of us, our vulnerabilities, our resilience, and our capacity for compassion, even in the most dire circumstances. It's a reminder of the respect we must have for nature and the importance of preparation when venturing into the wilderness. So, let us begin this journey together, tracing the footsteps of Isabel and Mia as they ascended into the Colorado mountains, unaware of the terror and triumph that awaited them. The morning of the hike dawned bright and clear, the kind of day that seems to promise nothing but good things. Isabel later told me how she and Mia had stood at the base of the trail, looking up at the mountain with a mixture of excitement and awe. It was so beautiful, Isabel recalled, her eyes distant with the memory. The sky was this incredible shade of blue, and the mountain, it just seemed to go on forever. We were so excited to get started. They had arrived at the trailhead early, the sun barely cresting the horizon. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. It was the kind of morning that makes you glad to be alive, that fills you with a sense of possibility and adventure. Isabel and Mia checked their backpacks one last time: water, snacks, first aid kit, extra layers of clothing. They had packed light, planning to make it to their midway camping point by nightfall. Looking back, I can't help but wish they had packed more, had been more prepared for the worst. But hindsight, as they say, is 20/20ths. As they set off up the trail, Isabel couldn't help but notice Mia's footwear. I remember looking down and seeing Mia's Chaco sandals, she told me later. I thought it was a bit odd for hiking, but Mia said they were super comfortable and that she hiked in them all the time. I didn't think much of it then. Those sandals would later prove to be a critical mistake, but at that moment neither of them could have predicted the challenges that lay ahead. The first few hours of the hike were uneventful. The trail wound its way up the mountain, sometimes steep, sometimes leveling out to offer breathtaking views of the valley below. Isabel and Mia chatted as they walked, pausing occasionally to take photos or simply to catch their breath and admire the scenery. It was during one of these breaks that we first noticed the clouds, Isabel recounted. They were just little wisps at first, nothing to worry about, but they seemed to be moving in fast. Despite the encroaching clouds, the two friends pressed on. They were making good time and were confident they would reach their planned camping spot well before nightfall. As they climbed higher, the vegetation began to thin, giving way to rockier terrain. The air grew cooler, and Isabel found herself zipping up her jacket. It was mid-afternoon when they reached a particularly challenging section of the trail. The path narrowed, hugging the side of the mountain with a steep drop-off to one side. Isabel remembered feeling a flutter of anxiety as they navigated this section, the wind picking up and tugging at their clothes. I remember looking down and feeling a bit dizzy, she told me. The drop was terrifying, and the wind didn't help. For the first time I started to wonder if we were in over our heads. But they pressed on, carefully picking their way along the narrow path. By the time they reached wider, more stable ground, both Isabel and Mia were visibly shaken. They paused for a moment, catching their breath and sharing a nervous laugh at the challenge they had just overcome. It was at this point that Mia first mentioned her feet. "My sandals are rubbing a bit," she said, examining a red spot on her heel. "I hope they don't give me blisters." Isabel offered some moleskin from the first aid kit, but it was clear that Mia's inappropriate footwear was starting to become an issue. Still, they were more than halfway to their planned camping spot. Turning back didn't seem like an option. As the afternoon wore on, the weather continued to deteriorate. The wisps of cloud had coalesced into a solid gray mass overhead, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. The wind, which had been a gentle breeze at the start of their hike, was now gusting strongly, carrying with it the first few drops of rain. "We need to pick up the pace," Isabel said, eyeing the sky warily. "I think we're in for some weather." Mia nodded, adjusting her backpack. "Yeah, let's go. My feet are killing me, but I just want to get to the campsite now." They pressed on, their earlier chatter replaced by determined silence. The trail grew steeper, more challenging, and Isabel found herself constantly checking on Mia, who was clearly struggling with her inadequate footwear. As they rounded a bend in the trail, the wind suddenly picked up, driving stinging rain into their faces. In a matter of minutes, they were soaked to the skin, the temperature plummeting as the storm hit in earnest. "We need to find shelter," Isabel shouted over the howling wind. "This is getting dangerous." Mia nodded, her face pale with cold and fear. They hurried along the trail, eyes scanning desperately for any kind of protection from the elements. The rain was coming down in sheets now, reducing visibility to mere feet. It was in this moment, as they huddled together against the fury of the storm, that Isabel realized just how unprepared they were for this situation. The beautiful day that had promised so much had turned into a nightmare, and they were trapped on the side of a mountain with night falling and a storm raging around them. The true test of their endurance and survival was just beginning, and as the darkness closed in, Isabel couldn't shake the feeling that something even more terrifying awaited them on this mountain. As the storm raged around them, Isabel and Mia stumbled through the increasingly treacherous terrain, desperately seeking shelter. The rain had turned the trail into a slippery mess, and every step was a battle against the howling wind and near-zero visibility. "I've never been so scared in my life," Isabel later confessed to me, her voice trembling at the memory. "It was like the mountain itself was trying to throw us off. We could barely see where we were going, and every gust of wind felt like it might sweep us away." Their clothes, soaked through, clung to their bodies like icy shrouds. Mia's sandals, wholly inadequate for these conditions, offered no protection against the cold and wet. Isabel could see her friend's feet were already showing signs of the beginnings of frostbite, the skin an angry red where it wasn't deathly pale. As they rounded a bend in the trail, Isabel's foot slipped on a wet rock. She felt herself falling, a scream torn from her throat as she slid towards the edge of the path. For one heart-stopping moment she thought this was it. She was going over the edge, plummeting to her death in the storm-shrouded valley below. But Mia's hand shot out, grabbing Isabel's arm in a vice-like grip. With a strength born of desperation, Mia hauled her friend back from the brink. They collapsed together on the muddy trail, gasping for breath, the realization of how close they'd come to disaster washing over them. "We can't stay out here," Mia shouted over the wind, her voice cracking with fear and cold. "We're going to die if we don't find shelter soon." Isabel nodded, struggling to her feet. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely zip up her jacket. "Look," she cried suddenly, pointing ahead. "I think I see something." Through the curtain of rain, a dark shape loomed. As they stumbled closer, they realized it was a large outcropping of rock, creating a small overhang. It wasn't much, but it was the best shelter they'd seen since the storm hit. They huddled under the overhang, pressing themselves against the cold stone. It offered some protection from the wind and rain, but did little to warm them. As night fell, the temperature continued to drop, and Isabel realized with growing horror that they were in real danger of hypothermia. "We need to get warm," she said, her teeth chattering. "We need to share body heat." They pressed close together, trying to conserve what little warmth they had left. Isabel rummaged in her backpack, pulling out an emergency blanket, a thin sheet of metallic material designed to reflect body heat. It wasn't much, but it was something. As they huddled together under the meager shelter of the emergency blanket, Isabel's mind raced. They were lost, cold, and trapped on the side of a mountain in a raging storm. Their phones had no signal, and even if they did, who could reach them in these conditions? The hours crawled by, each minute an eternity of cold and fear. The storm showed no signs of abating, the wind howling like a living thing, as if the mountain itself was trying to drive them away. In the darkness, every sound became magnified, every shadow a potential threat. Isabel found herself imagining all sorts of horrors lurking just beyond their little sanctuary. What if there were mountain lions or bears, drawn by the scent of their fear? What if the rock above them, weakened by the relentless rain, suddenly gave way, crushing them beneath tons of stone? These fears might seem irrational in the light of day, but in the dark, cold night, with exhaustion and hypothermia setting in, they became all too real. Isabel clung to Mia, each of them drawing what comfort they could from the other's presence. As the night wore on, Isabel noticed Mia becoming quieter, her responses slower. "We have to stay awake," Isabel insisted, shaking her friend. "If we fall asleep, we might not wake up." They talked, sharing stories from their lives, making plans for the future, anything to keep their minds active and ward off the creeping lethargy of hypothermia. But as the hours passed, it became harder and harder to focus, to stay alert. Just before dawn, when the night was at its darkest and coldest, Isabel heard something that made her blood run cold. It was a sound that didn't belong, something that stood out from the constant roar of the wind and rain. A scream, faint, distant, but unmistakably human. "Did you hear that?" she whispered to Mia, her heart pounding. Mia stirred sluggishly. "Hear what?" And then it came again, a cry for help carried on the wind. Someone else was out there, lost and alone in the storm. In that moment, Isabel was faced with a terrible choice. Stay in their meager shelter, preserving what little strength they had left, or venture out into the storm to try and help whoever was out there. As the cry came again, more desperate this time, Isabel knew she couldn't ignore it. Despite the danger, despite their own precarious situation, she couldn't leave another human being to face this nightmare alone. "We have to go," she said, struggling to her feet. "Someone needs our help." Mia looked at her in disbelief. "Are you crazy? We can barely help ourselves." But Isabel was already moving, driven by a determination she didn't know she possessed. "We can't leave them out there. We have to try." And so, as the first faint light of dawn began to penetrate the storm clouds, Isabel and Mia stepped out from their shelter and into the teeth of the storm once more. They were exhausted, cold, and terrified, but they were moving with purpose now. Little did they know that their decision to help would lead them into an even more harrowing situation, one that would test their endurance and humanity to the very limit. The storm had lessened somewhat as Isabel and Mia ventured out from their rocky shelter, but the wind still howled and the rain continued to fall in a steady, cold drizzle. The world around them was a gray blur, the familiar landscape of the mountain transformed into an alien, hostile environment. They paused, straining their ears for any sound that might guide them towards the source of the cries for help. For a long moment there was nothing but the sound of the wind and their own ragged breathing. "Maybe we imagined it," Mia said, her voice hollow with exhaustion. "Maybe," and then they heard it again, a faint, desperate cry carried on the wind. "Help, please help me." Isabel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. The voice sounded weak, filled with a terror that resonated deep within her. Without a word, she began to move in the direction of the sound, Mia following close behind. They picked their way carefully along the treacherous path, every step a battle against the slippery rocks and muddy ground. The trail they had been following the day before was now all but invisible, obscured by the debris brought down by the storm. "Hello," Isabel called out, her voice snatched away by the wind almost as soon as it left her lips. "We're here to help. Where are you?" They waited, hearts pounding, for any response. For a moment there was nothing but the howling of the wind. Then faintly they heard it again. "Here, I'm here." The voice seemed to be coming from somewhere off the trail, up a steep, rocky incline. Isabel and Mia exchanged a glance, both realizing the danger of leaving the relative safety of the path. But there was no question of turning back now. "We're coming," Isabel shouted, hoping her voice would carry to whoever was out there. "Keep calling out, we'll find you." They began to climb, their progress painfully slow. The rocks were slick with rain and moss, offering treacherous footing. Mia's sandals, already a liability on the trail, were now downright dangerous. She slipped several times, saved from a bad fall only by Isabel's quick reflexes. As they climbed higher, the wind grew stronger, threatening to tear them from the mountainside. The rain, driven horizontal by the gale, stung their faces and made it difficult to see. But still they pressed on, driven by the increasingly desperate cries for help. "I see something," Mia suddenly shouted, pointing ahead. Through the gloom they could make out a shape, a person, lying motionless on a small ledge above them. It was a woman, dressed in what looked like basic athletic wear, wholly inadequate for the conditions. With renewed energy, Isabel and Mia scrambled up the last few yards. As they reached the ledge, the full horror of the situation became clear. The woman was barely conscious, her skin a mottled blue-white from exposure. Her legs were visibly swollen and discolored, with ugly gashes that spoke of a bad fall. "Oh my God," Mia whispered, her face pale with shock. Isabel knelt beside the woman, trying to assess her condition. "Can you hear me? We're here to help. What's your name?" The woman's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed with pain. Rebecca," she managed to stammer through chattering teeth. "Please, help me." "We're going to get you out of here, Rebecca," Isabel assured her, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. "Can you tell us what happened? How long have you been out here?" Rebecca's brow furrowed in confusion. I don't know. A few hours, maybe. I was hiking. I think I fell." Isabel and Mia exchanged worried glances. Given Rebecca's condition, it was clear she had been exposed to the elements for much longer than a few hours. The hypothermia was clearly affecting her memory and judgment. "We need to get her down the mountain," Isabel said to Mia. "She needs medical attention fast." But Rebecca, despite her confused state, seemed to have latched on to one idea. "No," she protested weakly. "My car, it's up the mountain. We need to go up." "Rebecca, listen to me," Isabel said firmly, taking the woman's ice-cold hands in her own. "There's no driving access at the top. Your car isn't up there. We need to get you down to safety." Rebecca shook her head stubbornly, but her eyes were unfocused, her words slurring. "No, up, please." It was clear that rational argument wasn't going to work. Rebecca's confused state made her a danger to herself and to her rescuers. Isabel made a quick decision. "Okay, Rebecca," she said soothingly. "We'll help you. But first we need to warm you up a bit. Can you sit up for me?" With gentle coaxing, they managed to get Rebecca into a sitting position. Isabel unzipped her own jacket, ignoring the bite of the cold wind, and wrapped it around Rebecca's shoulders. Then she and Mia positioned themselves on either side of the injured woman. "On three, we're going to stand up," Isabel instructed. 1, 2, 3. They lifted Rebecca to her feet, supporting her weight between them. The woman cried out in pain as her injured legs took her weight, nearly collapsing again. But Isabel and Mia held firm, determined not to let her fall. "Okay, Rebecca," Isabel said, her voice calm despite the fear churning in her gut. "We're going to start moving now. Just lean on us, we've got you." And so began one of the most harrowing journeys of Isabel's life. Every step was a battle against the terrain, the weather, and Rebecca's own confused attempts to go in the wrong direction. The wind tore at them, threatening to send them tumbling down the mountainside. The rain had turned to sleet, stinging their faces and making the already treacherous footing even more dangerous. Mia's inadequate footwear made the descent particularly challenging for her. Isabel could see her friend's feet were raw and bleeding, but Mia didn't complain, focusing all her energy on helping Rebecca. They moved achingly slowly. Every yard gained a victory against the mountain and the storm. Rebecca drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes babbling incoherently about her car, other times falling into a silence so profound that Isabel had to keep checking to make sure she was still breathing. As they neared the bottom of the slope, disaster struck. Mia, her feet numb with cold and pain, misstepped on a slippery rock. She went down hard, crying out in pain as her ankle twisted beneath her. The sudden shift in weight nearly sent all three of them tumbling down the mountainside. Isabel managed to keep herself and Rebecca upright, but now they faced a new crisis. Mia couldn't put any weight on her injured ankle. They were still at least an hour from the trailhead, carrying an unconscious woman, and now one of them was injured too. For a moment, Isabel felt despair threatening to overwhelm her. They were cold, injured, exhausted, and still in danger. The mountain seemed determined to claim them, to add them to the grim statistics of hikers who ventured out unprepared and never returned. But as she looked at Mia, gritting her teeth against the pain, and felt Rebecca's faint breathing against her shoulder, Isabel found a well of strength she didn't know she possessed. They had come too far, endured too much to give up now. "We're going to make it," she said, as much to herself as to her companions. "We're going to get off this mountain, all of us." And with that declaration, Isabel adjusted her grip on Rebecca, reached down to help Mia to her feet, and began the final grueling leg of their descent. The mountain had thrown its worst at them, but they were still standing, still fighting. The true test of their endurance and will to survive was yet to come. The journey down the mountain was a nightmare of pain, exhaustion, and ever-present danger. Isabel's world had narrowed to a series of immediate concerns. Keep moving, don't fall, make sure Rebecca is breathing, check on Mia. Everything else, the cold, her own exhaustion and pain, the fear that gnawed at the edges of her mind, had to be pushed aside. Mia hobbled along on her injured ankle, her face a mask of determination and pain. She couldn't support much of Rebecca's weight anymore, but she refused to let go, stubbornly helping as much as she could. Isabel felt a surge of admiration for her friend's resilience. Rebecca drifted in and out of consciousness, her moments of lucidity becoming fewer and farther between. When she was awake, she alternated between confusion about their direction and gratitude for their help. "Thank you," she would mumble, her words slurred. "Thank you for finding me." As they descended, the sleet turned back to rain, a constant cold drizzle that seemed to sap what little warmth they had left. The trail, such as it was, had turned into a muddy stream. Each step was treacherous, the ground threatening to slide out from under their feet at any moment. Time lost all meaning. Isabel couldn't have said if they'd been walking for hours or days. The gray light of the overcast sky gave no indication of the time, and her watch had stopped working, its face cracked from a fall earlier in their ordeal. They paused briefly to rest, propping Rebecca against a large boulder. Isabel took the opportunity to check on their supplies. The news wasn't good. They were almost out of water, and what little food they had left was soggy and unappetizing. But they had no choice. They needed to keep their strength up. As Isabel was dividing up the last of their trail mix, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. It was a low rumble, almost felt more than heard, coming from somewhere up the mountain. "Did you hear that?" Mia asked, her eyes wide with fear. Isabel nodded grimly. She knew what that sound meant. The heavy rain, combined with the already saturated ground, had created ideal conditions for landslides. They needed to move, and fast. "We have to go," Isabel said, her voice tight with urgency. "Now." They got Rebecca to her feet, ignoring her confused protests, and started moving as quickly as they dared. The rumbling grew louder, punctuated now by the crack of trees being uprooted and the crash of falling rocks. They had just rounded a bend in the trail when Isabel saw it. A wall of mud, rocks, and broken trees hurtling down the mountainside towards them. It was a sight straight out of her worst nightmares, made all the more terrifying by its very reality. "Run!" she screamed, though running was hardly possible given their condition. They stumbled forward, panic lending them speed they didn't know they still possessed. Rebecca, seeming to sense the danger even in her confused state, tried to help, her feet scrabbling for purchase on the muddy ground. The roar of the landslide was deafening now, drowning out everything else. Isabel could feel the ground shaking beneath her feet. She didn't dare look back, focusing all her energy on moving forward, on getting them to safety. Suddenly, Mia cried out in pain. Her injured ankle had given way, sending her sprawling to the ground. Isabel turned, her heart in her throat, to see her friend lying in the path of the oncoming avalanche of mud and debris. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. Isabel knew she had a choice to make, and less than a second to make it. She could keep going with Rebecca, leaving Mia behind, or she could try to save her friend and risk all their lives. It wasn't really a choice at all. "Hold on to her," Isabel shouted to Rebecca, transferring the semi-conscious woman's weight fully onto her left side. Then with her right arm free, she lunged for Mia. Her hand closed around Mia's wrist, just as the leading edge of the landslide reached them. Isabel pulled with all her might, dragging Mia to her feet and forward, away from the deadly flow. They stumbled on, the landslide nipping at their heels. The sound was overwhelming, a roar that seemed to fill the world. Mud splattered their backs, rocks bounced past them, missing by inches. And then, suddenly, they were clear. The landslide continued its destructive path down the mountain, but they were out of its direct path. They collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, unable to believe they had survived. For several long moments they lay there, the rain washing the mud from their faces, their chests heaving as they gulped in air. They were alive. Against all odds, they had cheated death once again. But their ordeal was far from over. They were still on the mountain, still injured and exhausted, still responsible for a woman who needed urgent medical attention. And now the trail behind them was gone, obliterated by the landslide. As the adrenaline of their narrow escape began to fade, Isabel felt the full weight of their situation settle over her. They were truly on their own now, cut off from any hope of rescue coming up the mountain. Their only choice was to keep going down, to somehow find a way off this nightmare of a mountain before it was too late. With a groan of effort, Isabel pushed herself to her feet. Her body screamed in protest, every muscle aching, but she ignored it. They couldn't afford to rest, not yet, not when they were still in danger. "Come on," she said, reaching down to help Mia up. "We have to keep moving." And so they continued their descent, 3 battered, exhausted women against the mountain. The landslide had changed the landscape, making navigation even more challenging. But Isabel was determined. They had come too far, survived too much to give up now. As they made their slow, painful way down the mountain, Isabel found herself thinking of home, of the warmth and safety that seemed so far away now. She thought of me, her worrying older sister, and felt a pang of regret for the fear she must be causing. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though I couldn't hear her. "I'm going to make it home, I promise." Little did she know that the most challenging part of their journey was yet to come. The mountain had one final, terrible test in store for them, one that would push them to the very limits of their endurance and humanity. As the day wore on, Isabel, Mia, and Rebecca continued their grueling descent. The landslide had forced them off the main trail, and they were now picking their way through unfamiliar terrain. Every step was a challenge, the ground treacherous underfoot, hidden dangers lurking behind every boulder and in every shadow. Rebecca's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Her periods of consciousness were becoming shorter and less coherent. Isabel knew that if they didn't get her to medical help soon, they might lose her. This knowledge drove her forward, even as her own body screamed for rest. Mia was struggling too. Her injured ankle had swollen to twice its normal size, and she could barely put any weight on it. But she refused to slow them down, gritting her teeth against the pain and pushing onward. As the light began to fade, signaling the approach of another dangerous night on the mountain, Isabel spotted something that made her heart leap with hope. A break in the trees ahead, and beyond that, what looked like a road. "Look," she cried, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "I think we're almost there." Renewed energy surged through them at the prospect of rescue. They quickened their pace as much as their battered bodies would allow, the promise of safety drawing them onward. But the mountain had one last cruel trick to play. As they neared the edge of the forest, the ground suddenly gave way beneath their feet. Isabel felt a moment of weightlessness, a sensation of falling and then impact. They had stumbled into a hidden sinkhole, likely caused by the heavy rains and shifting earth. They tumbled down a steep slope, unable to stop their descent. Isabel lost her grip on Rebecca, hearing the other woman's cry of pain as she rolled away. Rocks and branches tore at their skin and clothes as they fell. After what seemed like an eternity, they came to a stop at the bottom of the sinkhole. Isabel lay there for a moment, dazed and in pain, struggling to catch her breath. Then reality rushed back in, and she scrambled to her feet, ignoring the protests of her battered body. "Mia! Rebecca!" she called out, panic rising in her throat. "Here," came Mia's weak reply from nearby. Isabel stumbled towards her friend's voice, finding Mia lying against a fallen log, her face contorted with pain. "My ankle," Mia gasped. "I think it's broken now." Isabel's heart sank. With Mia unable to walk, getting out of this sinkhole would be even more challenging. But they had no choice. They had to find a way. "Rebecca?" Isabel called again, scanning the dim interior of the sinkhole. A faint moan answered her. Following the sound, Isabel found Rebecca lying crumpled against the far wall of the sinkhole. The woman was barely conscious, her breathing shallow and rapid. As Isabel knelt beside her, she realized with horror that Rebecca's condition had worsened significantly in the fall. Her skin was cold and clammy, her pulse weak and erratic. She was in severe shock, and without immediate medical attention, she wouldn't survive much longer. Isabel looked up at the walls of the sinkhole. They were steep and slick with mud, offering no easy way out. The sinkhole was deep enough that calling for help was unlikely to be heard by anyone on the road above. In that moment, Isabel was faced with the most difficult decision of her life. They couldn't all get out of the sinkhole, not with Mia unable to walk and Rebecca barely clinging to life. But someone had to go for help, or they would all die here, so close to rescue, yet impossibly far. Isabel felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. She looked at Mia, her friend who had stood by her through this entire ordeal, and at Rebecca, the stranger they had risked everything to save. The choice she had to make was impossible, yet necessary. "Mia," Isabel said, her voice trembling, "I have to go for help. You need to stay here with Rebecca, keep her warm, keep her alive. I'll come back with rescue, I promise." Mia's eyes widened with fear, but she nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Go," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We'll be okay, just hurry." Isabel hugged her friend fiercely, then turned to the wall of the sinkhole. It was steep and slippery, but there were roots and rocks protruding from the earth that could serve as handholds. It would be a difficult climb, but it was their only chance. With a deep breath, Isabel began to climb. Her muscles screamed in protest, every movement sending jolts of pain through her battered body. The mud made it difficult to get a good grip, and more than once she slipped, her heart racing as she scrabbled for purchase on the treacherous slope. As she climbed, Isabel's mind raced with fears and doubts. What if she couldn't find help in time? What if she got lost trying to find the road? What if Mia and Rebecca didn't survive until she returned? The what-ifs threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed them aside, focusing solely on the next handhold, the next step. After what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, Isabel's hand finally grasped the edge of the sinkhole. With a final Herculean effort, she pulled herself up and over, collapsing onto solid ground. She lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, her limbs shaking with exhaustion. But there was no time to rest. Forcing herself to her feet, Isabel stumbled towards the road she had glimpsed earlier. The fading light made it difficult to see, but she pressed on, driven by desperation and the knowledge that 2 lives depended on her success. When her feet finally touched asphalt, Isabel could have wept with relief. She was on a road, a real paved road that had to lead to civilization. But which way to go? In the gathering darkness, both directions looked equally promising and equally daunting. Isabel chose a direction at random and began to run. Her body protested every step, but she ignored the pain, focusing on the urgent need to find help. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs felt like lead. Then she ran some more. Just as she was about to collapse from exhaustion, Isabel saw something that made her heart leap, headlights in the distance. A car was coming. She stumbled to the middle of the road, waving her arms frantically. The car slowed, then stopped. An older couple peered out at her, their faces a mix of concern and wariness. "Please," Isabel gasped, her voice ragged. "My friends, they're hurt. We need help." The next few hours passed in a blur. The couple called 911, and soon the quiet mountain road was alive with activity. Search and rescue teams arrived, along with paramedics and police. Isabel found herself repeating her story over and over, guiding a rescue team back to the sinkhole where Mia and Rebecca waited. The relief she felt when Mia and Rebecca were finally brought up from the sinkhole was overwhelming. Both were in bad shape, Mia with her broken ankle, Rebecca still dangerously hypothermic, but they were alive. As they were loaded into ambulances, Isabel finally allowed herself to believe that their ordeal was truly over. At the hospital, as doctors tended to her own injuries, Isabel was reunited with Mia. They held each other, crying and laughing at the same time, the full weight of their experience finally hitting them. "We made it," Mia said, her voice filled with wonder. "We actually made it." Isabel nodded, too overcome with emotion to speak. They had faced the mountain's fury, stared death in the face, and emerged victorious. The bond forged between them in those harrowing hours would last a lifetime. Later they received news about Rebecca. She was in intensive care, but the doctors were cautiously optimistic about her recovery. Her family had been contacted and were on their way. Isabel and Mia's timely rescue had saved her life. As the adrenaline wore off and the reality of their survival sank in, Isabel found herself reflecting on the experience. The terror they had faced, the challenges they had overcome, had changed her in profound ways. She had discovered strength she never knew she possessed, faced fears she never knew she had. The mountain had tested them, pushed them to their limits and beyond. But in doing so, it had revealed the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Isabel knew she would carry the lessons learned on that mountain for the rest of her life. As she drifted off to sleep in her hospital bed, exhausted but profoundly grateful to be alive, Isabel's last thought was of the mountain. It stood silent and immovable, indifferent to the dramas that played out on its slopes. But for those who dared to challenge it, who faced its tests and emerged on the other side, it offered a unique gift, a deeper understanding of oneself and the indomitable strength of the human will. The terror in Colorado had changed Isabel forever. But in facing that terror, in overcoming seemingly insurmountable odds, she had discovered a truth about herself and about humanity that would stay with her always. In the days following their rescue, Isabel and Mia found themselves at the center of a media storm. Their story of survival against all odds had captured the public's imagination, and reporters clamored for interviews and details of their harrowing experience. Isabel, still processing the trauma of their ordeal, found the attention overwhelming. She gave a few brief statements, emphasizing the importance of proper preparation when hiking and the incredible work of the search and rescue teams. But mostly she focused on recovery, both physical and emotional. The physical toll of their adventure was significant. Isabel had suffered numerous cuts and bruises, a mild case of hypothermia, and a sprained wrist from her desperate climb out of the sinkhole. Mia's injuries were more severe. Her broken ankle required surgery, and she faced months of physical therapy. But it was the emotional impact that proved most challenging to navigate. Isabel found herself jumping at sudden noises, plagued by nightmares of falling and being buried alive. The sound of rain against the window could send her into a panic. Her mind immediately transported back to that terrifying night on the mountain. Mia struggled too. Her usual carefree attitude was subdued, replaced by a newfound caution and anxiety. She blamed herself for their predicament, convinced that if she had worn proper hiking boots, things might have turned out differently. It was during one of their shared physical therapy sessions that Isabel finally broached the subject. "You know it's not your fault, right?" she said, watching Mia struggle through an exercise to rebuild strength in her ankle. Mia didn't meet her eyes. "If I had been better prepared." "We were both underprepared," Isabel interrupted. "And yeah, maybe different shoes would have helped, but we couldn't have predicted that storm or finding Rebecca or any of it. We did the best we could with what we had." Mia was quiet for a long moment. "I keep thinking about what could have happened," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you hadn't found that sinkhole exit, if rescue hadn't come when it did." Isabel reached out, gripping her friend's hand. "But it didn't happen that way. We survived. We saved Rebecca. That's what matters." It was a conversation they would have many times over the coming weeks and months, each of them helping the other work through the guilt, fear, and lingering trauma of their experience. As they recovered, Isabel and Mia received updates on Rebecca's condition. The woman they had risked everything to save had pulled through, thanks in large part to their timely rescue. When she was well enough for visitors, Isabel and Mia went to see her. The reunion was emotional. Rebecca, still weak but on the road to recovery, broke down in tears as she thanked them for saving her life. "I don't remember much," she admitted, "but I know I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you two. How can I ever repay you?" Isabel shook her head. "There's no debt. We did what anyone would do." But even as she said it, Isabel knew it wasn't entirely true. Their decision to help, to risk their own lives for a stranger, had been a choice, one that not everyone would have made. It was a realization that filled her with a complex mix of pride and humility. In the months that followed, as they continued to heal and process their experience, Isabel, Mia, and Rebecca formed a bond that went beyond friendship. They had shared an experience that few could understand, faced death together, and emerged on the other side. It was a connection that would last a lifetime. Their story had another unexpected impact. It sparked a conversation about hiking safety and the importance of proper preparation. Local authorities used their experience as a cautionary tale, implementing new safety measures and education programs for hikers. Isabel found herself invited to speak at schools and outdoor clubs, sharing her story and the lessons she had learned. It was difficult at first, reliving the terror of those days on the mountain, but she came to see it as a way to give meaning to their ordeal, to perhaps prevent others from facing similar dangers. As the one-year anniversary of their rescue approached, Isabel, Mia, and Rebecca made a decision that surprised many. They announced their intention to return to the mountain. "We're not going to hike it," Isabel explained to me when she shared their plan. "We're just going to visit the base, to face it on our own terms." I was worried, of course. The thought of my sister returning to the place that had nearly claimed her life filled me with anxiety. But I also understood their need for closure, to reclaim some of the power that the mountain had taken from them. On a clear, sunny day, so different from the storm-racked afternoon of their original hike, Isabel, Mia, and Rebecca stood at the base of the mountain. They were silent for a long moment, each lost in their own thoughts and memories. Finally, Rebecca spoke. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "I never really saw it before, you know. I was so focused on the climb, on reaching the top. I never just looked at it." Mia nodded. "It's not our enemy," she said. "It's just itself. We were the ones who weren't prepared." Isabel felt a wave of emotion wash over her as she gazed up at the mountain peaks. The fear was still there, a knot in her stomach that might never fully unravel. But there was something else too, a sense of respect, of understanding. "We faced you," she whispered, her words meant for the mountain and for herself. "We faced you and we survived, and we'll never forget the lessons you taught us." As they turned to leave, Isabel felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The mountain would always be a part of her story, a defining moment in her life. But it no longer held power over her. She had faced her fears, confronted the trauma, and come out stronger on the other side. The terror in Colorado had changed them all, but in facing that terror, in overcoming it and helping each other heal, they had discovered strengths they never knew they possessed. It was a gift, hard-won and precious, that would guide them for the rest of their lives. As I sit here recounting my sister's incredible tale of survival, I'm struck by the profound impact it has had not just on Isabel, Mia, and Rebecca, but on our entire family and community. The echoes of those terrifying days in the Colorado mountains continue to resonate, shaping the way we view the world and our place in it. Isabel is not the same person she was before that fateful hiking trip. The carefree young woman who set out on what was supposed to be a simple adventure has been replaced by someone more thoughtful, more aware of the fragility of life and the importance of preparation. But she's also stronger, more confident in her ability to face challenges and overcome adversity. The experience has changed our family dynamic as well. We've always been close, but there's a new depth to our relationships now, a heightened appreciation for each other and for the time we have together. Every family gathering feels like a celebration of life and survival. Mia, too, has been transformed by the ordeal. Her recovery was long and difficult, but she approached it with a determination that impressed everyone around her. The experience seems to have focused her energy, giving her a new sense of purpose. She's now studying to become a wilderness guide, determined to help others experience the beauty of nature safely and responsibly. Rebecca's life took perhaps the most dramatic turn. Her brush with death led to a complete reevaluation of her priorities. She left her high-stress job in Chicago and moved to Colorado permanently, where she now works with search and rescue teams, using her own experience to help save others. The three of them, Isabel, Mia, and Rebecca, share a bond that goes beyond friendship. They meet regularly, sometimes just to talk, other times to hike, always well prepared and on well-marked trails. They've become advocates for hiking safety, sharing their story as a cautionary tale, but also as a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Their experience has had ripple effects throughout the community. Local authorities have implemented new safety measures for hikers, including more detailed trail markers and increased education programs. Outdoor equipment stores now offer free classes on wilderness survival and the importance of proper gear. As for me, hearing Isabel recount her story in detail was both horrifying and awe-inspiring. The terror she faced, the impossible decisions she had to make, the strength she found within herself, it all seems almost unbelievable. And yet I see the truth of it in her eyes, in the way she carries herself now, in the newfound purpose that drives her. I find myself looking at the world differently too. The comforts of daily life, which I once took for granted, now seem like precious gifts. Every time I hear rain against the window, I think of Isabel, Mia, and Rebecca huddled on that mountain, fighting for survival. It's a stark reminder of how quickly life can change, how thin the line is between safety and danger. But perhaps the most important lesson I've taken from Isabel's experience is the incredible capacity for human endurance and compassion. In the face of unimaginable hardship, my sister and her friends not only survived, but went above and beyond to help a stranger in need. They demonstrated the very best of humanity, resilience, selflessness, and an unwavering will to live. Their story has become a sort of modern parable in our community, a reminder of the unpredictability of life and the importance of facing our fears. It's a tale of terror, yes, but also one of triumph, over nature, over circumstance, and over the limitations we often place on ourselves. As I wrap up this account, I'm reminded of something Isabel said to me not long after her return. We were sitting on the porch watching a summer storm roll in when she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said, "I used to think courage was about not being afraid. But I was wrong. Courage is about being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. It's about facing your fears, not ignoring them." Those words have stayed with me, a profound truth born from harrowing experience. The terror in Colorado changed Isabel, changed all of us. But in facing that terror, in overcoming it and emerging stronger, we've gained a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. It's a reminder that while we can't always control the challenges life throws our way, we can control how we respond to them. We can choose courage over fear, action over paralysis, compassion over self-preservation. And in making those choices, we can discover strengths we never knew we had. As I look to the future, I know that whatever challenges come our way, we'll face them with the lessons learned from Isabel's incredible journey of survival. The echoes of terror from those Colorado mountains have transformed into a resounding affirmation of life, resilience, and the indomitable human spirit. And that, perhaps, is the most valuable lesson of all.